The hive cities of the 41st millennium stand as testament to humanity's relentless drive to survive and multiply, even in the face of hostile environments that would render entire worlds uninhabitable. These colossal arcologies stretch across continents and pierce the very heavens, housing populations that dwarf the combined citizenry of ancient Terra's greatest nations. Each hive represents not merely an urban center, but a self-contained ecosystem of humanity, a vertical world where billions live, work, and die without ever setting foot upon natural soil. The genesis of these towering monuments lies buried in the forgotten annals of the dark age of technology, when humanity first ventured forth from Terra to claim the stars. The earliest hive cities began as pragmatic solutions to immediate survival needs, constructed from the repurposed hulks of colony ships that had carried humanity's children across the void. When these massive vessels reached their destinations, the colonists faced worlds that were often hostile to human life, atmospheres thick with toxins, surfaces scoured by radiation, or environments so harsh that traditional settlement patterns proved impossible. Rather than abandon their new homes, these early pioneers demonstrated the ingenuity that would become humanity's defining characteristic. They stripped their colony ships of everything useful, from hull plating to life support systems, and began constructing vertical settlements that could house their growing populations while protecting them from the hostile environments outside. The ship's fusion reactors became the power cores of these early settlements. Their hydroponics bays expanded into vast agricultural levels, and their hull armor was repurposed into the foundations of structures that would endure for millennia. As these settlements grew, they incorporated salvaged terraforming equipment into their expanding structures. Atmospheric processors became integrated into the hive's environmental systems, their massive intake valves and filtration networks forming the lungs through which these cities breathed. Geological modification equipment was repurposed to carve deep foundations into planetary bedrock, creating the stable bases necessary to support structures that would eventually reach into the upper atmosphere. Mining equipment designed to extract resources from hostile worlds became the tools used to quarry the materials needed for endless expansion. The architectural evolution of these early settlements followed patterns that would be replicated across thousands of worlds throughout human space. As populations grew and resources became available, the vertical expansion began in earnest. Each new level built upon the last, creating a stratified society that reflected both practical necessities and emerging social hierarchies. The most critical systems, power generation, water recycling, and primary life support, were buried deep within the hive's core, protected by layers of rockcrete and adamantium plating that could withstand orbital bombardment. The structural composition of a mature hive city represents the pinnacle of imperial engineering, combining ancient technologies with materials that can withstand the immense stresses of supporting billions of tons of construction, reaching heights that challenge the very limits of planetary gravity. The foundation systems extend deep into planetary bedrock, often reaching depths of several kilometers below the surface. These foundations consist of massive rockcrete pylons, each one reinforced with adamantium threading and connected by a network of support struts that distribute the hive's enormous weight across vast areas of the planet's crust. Rockcrete itself represents one of humanity's most enduring construction materials, a composite substance that combines traditional concrete with synthetic polymers and metallic additives that give it strength comparable to natural stone while maintaining the workability of poured concrete. The formula for rockcrete varies from world to world, incorporating local materials and adapting to planetary conditions, but the basic principles remain constant across the Imperium. On worlds with high gravity, additional metallic content increases the material's compressive strength, while on planets with corrosive atmospheres, chemical inhibitors prevent degradation over time. The adamantium framework that forms the skeleton of every hive city represents technology that dates back to the dark age of technology, when humanity first discovered methods for creating materials of nearly indestructible strength. Adamantium beams and support columns form the primary load-bearing structure of each hive level, their crystalline molecular structure capable of supporting weights that would crush conventional steel. The process of creating adamantium requires specialized facilities and enormous amounts of energy, making it one of the most valuable construction materials in the Imperium, reserved for the most critical structural elements. Standard template construct building patterns provide the blueprints that govern hive construction throughout the Imperium, ensuring that despite local variations in materials and conditions, the basic structural principles remain sound. These SDC patterns encode millennia of engineering knowledge, from the optimal spacing of support columns to the most efficient layouts for residential blocks. The patterns include specifications for everything from the thickness of blast doors to the diameter of ventilation shafts, creating a standardized approach to construction that has proven its worth across countless worlds and situations. The integration of SDC patterns into hive construction goes beyond mere structural elements to encompass entire systems and subsystems. Power distribution networks follow SDC specifications that ensure redundancy and maintainability, with backup systems and alternative routing built into every level. Water recycling and waste processing systems adhere to patterns that maximize efficiency while minimizing the risk of catastrophic failure. Even the layout of residential areas follows SDC guidelines that balance population density with the need for emergency evacuation routes and fire suppression systems. The vertical stratification that defines hive society emerges naturally from the physical constraints and opportunities presented by these massive structures. At the apex of each hive, the noble spires pierce the upper atmosphere, their crystalline domes and adamantium towers reaching heights where the air grows thin and the stars become visible even during daylight hours. These spires house the planetary nobility, the wealthy merchant houses, and the upper echelons of the Adeptus Administratum, their elevated position both literally and figuratively, placing them above the teeming masses below. The noble spires themselves represent architectural marvels that combine defensive necessity with ostentatious display. Their walls incorporate void shields and defensive turrets capable of repelling aerial assault, while their interiors feature vast halls decorated with priceless artifacts and artworks gathered from across the galaxy. The air at these heights requires artificial pressurization and filtration, creating sealed environments where the wealthy can live in climate-controlled comfort, while the rest of the hive swelters in recycled atmosphere, thick with industrial pollutants. Between the noble spires and the depths of the underhive stretch hundreds of levels of hab-blocks, manufactorums, and commercial districts that house the bulk of the hive's population. These middle levels represent the economic heart of the Hive City, where billions of workers toil in factories producing everything from basic foodstuffs to sophisticated technological components. The architecture of these levels prioritizes function over form, with identical hab-blocks stretching for kilometers in every direction, their monotonous facades broken only by the occasional shrine to the emperor or propaganda display exhorting citizens to greater productivity. The environmental conditions within these middle levels vary dramatically based on their proximity to industrial facilities and their position within the hive's atmospheric circulation systems. Levels near major manufactorums suffer from elevated temperatures and air pollution, while those positioned along primary ventilation shafts enjoy relatively clean air and stable temperatures. The competition for habitation rights in the more desirable areas drives a complex economy of bribes, favors, and bureaucratic maneuvering that consumes enormous amounts of time and resources. As one descends deeper into the hive, the quality of construction and living conditions deteriorates markedly. The lower levels, built upon the foundations of earlier settlements and often incorporating salvaged materials from decommissioned facilities, house the hive's working poor and those who have fallen from grace in the upper levels. These areas suffer from inadequate lighting, poor ventilation, and aging infrastructure that receives minimal maintenance attention from the hive's engineering crews. The underhive represents the deepest inhabited levels of the Hive City, where official imperial authority grows thin and alternative power structures emerge to fill the void. These depths exist below the reach of the hive's primary life support systems, their inhabitants surviving on recycled air that has already passed through dozens of levels above and water that has been processed and reprocessed until it barely meets the minimum standards for human consumption. The architecture of the underhive consists largely of improvised structures built within the spaces between major support columns and infrastructure conduits, creating a labyrinthine environment where entire communities can exist undetected by the authorities above. The role of hive cities as critical population centers extends far beyond their function as mere urban areas. On worlds where the surface has become uninhabitable due to pollution, radiation, or atmospheric corruption, the hive cities represent the only viable locations for human habitation. These sealed environments provide protection from hostile external conditions while concentrating populations in areas where life support systems can operate efficiently. The recycling systems within a hive city can support populations far exceeding what the planet's natural ecosystem could sustain, making them essential for maintaining the vast human populations required to fuel the Imperium's war machine. On overcrowded worlds where natural population growth has exceeded the carrying capacity of traditional settlements, hive cities provide the vertical expansion necessary to accommodate billions of additional citizens. The efficiency of vertical construction allows for population densities that would be impossible to achieve with horizontal expansion, while the integrated nature of hive systems reduces the infrastructure requirements compared to sprawling urban areas. A single hive city can house populations equivalent to entire planetary systems, making them crucial for maintaining the demographic reserves that the Imperium requires for its endless wars. The industrial capacity concentrated within hive cities makes them indispensable to the Imperial war effort. The manufactorums that occupy entire levels of these structures can produce everything from basic ammunition to sophisticated vehicles and equipment, their production lines operating continuously to meet the demands of the Astra Militarum and other imperial forces. The concentration of both population and industrial capacity within hive cities creates synergies that allow for specialization and efficiency impossible to achieve in smaller settlements, making them essential components of the imperial economy. The highest reaches of every hive city belong to bloodlines whose origins stretch back through millennia of recorded history, their genealogies preserved in vast archives that document marriages, alliances, and betrayals spanning dozens of generations. These noble houses trace their lineages to the earliest colonial governors, military commanders, and merchant princes who established dominion over their worlds during humanity's great expansion across the galaxy. The House of Kryn on Necromunda claims descent from the original mining consortium leaders, who first exploited the planet's rich deposits of rare minerals, while the Calixian nobility of Hive Tarsus maintains detailed records proving their bloodline's connection to rogue trader dynasties that explored the Calixis sector during the 32nd millennium. The hereditary nature of Spire nobility creates a closed system where political power passes from parent to child according to ancient customs and legal frameworks that have remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. These inheritance laws vary between worlds and even between individual hive cities, but they consistently prioritize bloodline purity and documented lineage over merit or capability. The House of Magnara on Armageddon maintains its position through strict primogeniture, with the eldest child inheriting all titles and holdings regardless of gender, while the noble families of Hive Primus on Necromunda practice a complex system of distributed inheritance that divides holdings among multiple heirs while maintaining unified political authority. Marriage alliances between noble houses function as the primary mechanism for consolidating power, acquiring resources, and establishing political stability within the confined ecosystem of Spire society. These unions rarely involve romantic considerations, instead representing carefully calculated exchanges of wealth, territory, and influence designed to strengthen both participating families. The betrothal of Lady Helmor to Lord Catalyst in the 40th millennium united two of Necromunda's most powerful houses, combining the Helmore family's control over the planetary governorship with the Catalyst monopoly on atmospheric processing systems that keep the Upper Spire habitable. The negotiation process for noble marriages involves detailed contracts that specify not only the exchange of dowries and territorial rights, but also the political obligations each house assumes toward the other. These marriage treaties often include provisions for mutual defense agreements, trade monopolies, and shared voting rights in planetary councils, creating webs of interdependence that can persist for centuries after the original couple has died. The marriage contract between House Kryn and House Orlok established joint control over 3 major mining operations, while guaranteeing Orlok access to Kryn's private landing facilities for off-world trade, an arrangement that has shaped Necromunda's political landscape for over 2,000 years. The children of these political unions grow up understanding that their personal desires remain subordinate to the strategic needs of their houses, receiving education that emphasizes diplomatic skills, economic theory, and the intricate protocols that govern inter-house relationships. Young nobles learn to read the subtle signs of political favor and disfavor, to navigate the complex etiquette that surrounds formal gatherings, and to identify opportunities for advancing their family's interests through careful manipulation of social situations. The education provided to Spire nobility includes instruction in multiple languages, both to facilitate communication with off-world trading partners and to enable the use of coded conversations that can conceal sensitive information from potential rivals. When diplomatic marriages and trade agreements fail to resolve conflicts between noble houses, the competition for resources and influence escalates into more direct forms of warfare conducted through methods that maintain plausible deniability while achieving decisive results. Assassination represents the most elegant solution to political problems, eliminating rivals without the messy complications of open warfare that might attract unwanted attention from imperial authorities. The death of Lord Vasek of House Goliath appeared to result from a mechanical failure in his personal transport, but careful investigation revealed subtle modifications to the vehicle's guidance systems that could only have been accomplished by someone with intimate knowledge of its security protocols. Professional assassins operating within Spire society maintain elaborate cover identities as servants, entertainers, or minor functionaries, allowing them to move freely through noble households while gathering intelligence and positioning themselves for optimal strikes. These killers often spend years establishing their credentials and building trust within their target's organization, demonstrating patience and planning that distinguishes them from crude murderers operating in the Underhive. The assassin who eliminated Lady Cawdor spent 3 years working as a food taster in her household, gradually building a reputation for loyalty and discretion that eventually earned her access to the lady's private chambers during vulnerable moments. Economic warfare provides an alternative to assassination that can achieve similar results while appearing to represent natural market forces rather than deliberate sabotage. Noble houses control vast networks of manufacturing facilities, trading relationships, and financial institutions that can be weaponized against rivals through coordinated market manipulation, strategic bankruptcies, and the selective application of economic pressure. House Delac's victory over the minor house, Raven, involved a carefully orchestrated campaign that destroyed Raven's credit rating, triggered defaults on their major contracts, and ultimately forced them to sell their holdings at ruinous prices to avoid complete financial collapse. The information networks that enable these economic attacks require sophisticated intelligence gathering operations that penetrate rival organizations at multiple levels, from corrupted accountants who provide financial data to compromised security personnel who reveal the timing of important meetings and transactions. The noble houses maintain private intelligence services that rival the capabilities of imperial agencies, employing code breakers, surveillance specialists, and infiltration experts who can access supposedly secure communications and gather the detailed information necessary for successful economic warfare. House Delac's reputation for information brokerage stems from their investment in quantum encrypted communication networks and psychically shielded data storage facilities that protect their intelligence assets from both rival houses and imperial investigation. The physical environment within the noble spires reflects the enormous wealth and technological sophistication available to the planetary elite, creating living spaces that exist in stark contrast to the harsh conditions endured by the billions of citizens dwelling in the levels below. Climate control systems maintain perfect atmospheric conditions throughout the spire levels, regulating temperature, humidity, and air pressure to provide optimal comfort regardless of external weather patterns or seasonal variations. These environmental systems incorporate advanced filtration technology that removes all traces of industrial pollution from the air, creating atmospheres so pure that visitors from lower levels often experience discomfort from the unfamiliar cleanliness. The architectural design of noble residences emphasizes both luxury and security, incorporating materials and technologies that demonstrate wealth while providing protection against the various threats that plague spire society. Walls constructed from rare stone quarried on distant worlds showcase the family's interstellar trading connections, while hidden weapon systems and reinforced blast doors provide defense against assassination attempts and rival house incursions. The private chambers of Lord Helmore feature walls made from crystallized promethium that creates beautiful refractive patterns while providing protection equivalent to military-grade armor plating. Imported delicacies from across the galaxy stock the larders of noble households, representing not merely sustenance, but symbols of political connections and economic power that extend beyond planetary boundaries. Amasic from the finest distilleries on distant agri-worlds flows freely at spire gatherings, while rare spices harvested from death worlds add exotic flavors to meals prepared by master chefs trained in culinary traditions that span multiple sectors. The dinner table of Lady Catalyst regularly features fruits that require specialized stasis fields for interstellar transport, their cost exceeding the annual income of entire hab-block communities. The medical facilities available to spire nobility incorporate technologies that can extend human lifespans far beyond the natural limits experienced by ordinary citizens, creating a gerontocracy where ancient patriarchs and matriarchs maintain control over their houses for centuries. Juvenat treatments slow the aging process through complex biochemical interventions that repair cellular damage and maintain organ function, while more advanced procedures can replace failing organs with vat-grown substitutes that perfectly match the recipient's genetic profile. Lord Kryn celebrated his 300th birthday while maintaining the physical appearance and mental acuity of a man one-third his actual age, his longevity ensuring continuity of leadership that spans multiple generations of lesser nobles. The political structure that governs Hive Cities reflects the complex relationship between local autonomy and imperial authority, creating a system where planetary governors must balance the demands of their noble constituents against the requirements imposed by distant terra. The planetary governor typically emerges from the most powerful noble house, or represents a compromise candidate acceptable to multiple competing factions, their authority dependent on maintaining the delicate coalition of interests that keeps the hive functioning. Governor Gerontius of Necromunda owes his position to a carefully negotiated agreement between 6 major houses that granted him executive authority in exchange for specific concessions regarding trade rights and territorial control. The governor's court functions as the primary interface between local political structures and imperial bureaucracy, hosting representatives from various Adeptus organizations while managing the competing demands of noble houses, merchant guilds, and military commanders. These court sessions involve elaborate ceremonies that reinforce the governor's authority while providing opportunities for nobles to present petitions, negotiate agreements, and display their wealth and influence to potential allies and rivals. The weekly audiences held in the governor's palace on Armageddus Prime feature processions of noble delegations bearing gifts and tribute, their presentations carefully choreographed to demonstrate proper respect while advancing their political agendas. Adeptus Administratum representatives embedded within the governor's administration ensure that imperial interests receive proper consideration in local decision-making processes, their presence serving as a constant reminder that planetary autonomy exists only within limits defined by distant terra. These imperial functionaries monitor tax collection, military recruitment, and resource allocation to verify compliance with imperial mandates, while their reports to sector headquarters can trigger investigations or interventions that threaten local political arrangements. The Administratum Sector Chief on Valhalla maintains a staff of several hundred clerks and auditors who review every major decision made by the planetary government, their approval required for any policy that might affect imperial tithe obligations or military recruitment quotas. The balance between local autonomy and imperial compliance requires constant negotiation and adjustment as circumstances change and new demands emerge from higher authorities. Planetary governors must demonstrate their loyalty to the emperor while protecting the interests of their noble supporters, often requiring creative interpretations of imperial directives that satisfy both constituencies without triggering punitive interventions. The successful governance of Mordian achieved this balance by exceeding imperial tithe requirements through increased industrial efficiency, allowing the planetary government to maintain generous subsidies for noble houses while earning commendations from sector command for their exemplary compliance with imperial mandates. Noble houses bear primary responsibility for maintaining the complex infrastructure systems that keep Hive Cities operational, their financial contributions funding everything from atmospheric processors to waste recycling facilities that support billions of citizens. These infrastructure investments represent both civic obligations and strategic assets that provide leverage in political negotiations, as houses that control critical systems can threaten service disruptions to achieve their policy objectives. House Orlok's monopoly over power distribution networks in Hive Primus gives them veto power over any political decision that threatens their interests, since their withdrawal of cooperation could plunge entire levels into darkness and chaos. The funding of Astra Militarum regiments represents one of the most significant financial obligations imposed on noble houses, requiring enormous expenditures for equipment, training, and transportation that constrain even the wealthiest families. These military contributions often involve multi-generational commitments that bind noble houses to ongoing support for regiments raised from their territories, creating long-term financial obligations that influence political decision-making for decades. House Cadian maintained financial responsibility for the 47th Shock Troops throughout their century-long deployment in the Sabbat World's Crusade. Their ongoing support, including replacement equipment, medical supplies, and death benefits for fallen soldiers that totaled billions of thrones over the campaign's duration. The tithe obligations that flow from Hive worlds to the broader Imperium require careful coordination between noble houses to ensure that planetary contributions meet imperial requirements while preserving sufficient resources for local needs and continued economic growth. These tithe calculations involve complex negotiations between competing interests, as each house seeks to minimize their individual contributions while maintaining their share of political influence and economic benefits. The annual tithe assessment for Necromunda requires coordination between all major houses to determine optimal combinations of manufactured goods, raw materials, and military personnel that satisfy imperial demands while preserving the industrial capacity necessary for continued prosperity. The transition from the rarefied atmosphere of the noble spires to the teeming middle levels reveals the true scale of human habitation within Hive Cities, where standardized hab-blocks stretch across kilometers of each level in monotonous repetition. These residential structures house the vast majority of the hive's population, their identical facades creating geometric patterns that extend beyond the horizon in every direction. Each hab block follows standard template construct specifications that prioritize maximum occupancy over individual comfort, resulting in structures that can accommodate thousands of residents within their reinforced rockcrete walls. The basic hab block design consists of a central structural core containing elevators, stairwells, and primary utility conduits, surrounded by layers of residential units arranged in precise geometric patterns. These units measure exactly 4 meters by 3 meters, providing just enough space for basic human habitation while maximizing the number of families that can be housed within each structure. The walls between units utilize sound-dampening materials that reduce but do not eliminate noise transmission, creating an environment where the sounds of neighboring families become part of the constant background din that characterizes middle hive life. Individual hab units accommodate entire families within their cramped confines, with sleeping arrangements that often involve multiple shifts as family members rotate access to the single bed that dominates each unit's floor space. Children sleep in shifts according to their work schedules, with those assigned to morning manufactorum duties occupying the bed during evening hours, while their siblings who work night shifts claim sleeping time during the day. Parents frequently sacrifice their own rest periods to ensure their children receive adequate sleep before their mandatory work assignments, leading to chronic exhaustion that becomes a defining characteristic of middle hive existence. Storage space within each hab unit consists of built-in wall compartments and overhead storage areas that must accommodate all personal possessions, clothing, and emergency supplies for the entire family. These storage systems follow standardized designs that maximize utility while preventing the accumulation of excess possessions that might create fire hazards or impede emergency evacuation procedures. Families develop elaborate organizational systems to manage their limited storage capacity, with personal items rotated between active use and storage according to seasonal requirements and work schedule changes. Privacy represents perhaps the greatest luxury within hab block communities, achievable only through careful scheduling and mutual agreements between family members. Parents conduct private conversations during their children's work shifts, while intimate relationships require coordination with neighbors to ensure temporary privacy through sound masking or temporary relocation arrangements. The psychological stress created by constant proximity to family members contributes to the high rates of domestic violence and mental instability documented in middle hive medical records, with overcrowding-related incidents accounting for a significant percentage of all reported crimes within hab block communities. The sanitation facilities serving each hab block consist of communal washrooms and waste disposal units shared between multiple residential levels, creating queuing systems that can extend for hours during peak usage periods. These facilities operate on strict schedules that allocate specific time slots to different residential blocks, with violations of assigned usage times resulting in fines or temporary suspension of access privileges. The water recycling systems that supply these facilities process wastewater through multiple filtration stages before returning it to the general supply, though the recycling process often imparts distinctive tastes and odors that remind users of the water's previous applications. Communal cooking facilities located on designated levels within each hab block provide access to food preparation equipment that individual families cannot afford to maintain within their cramped living spaces. These kitchens operate according to reservation systems that allocate cooking time based on family size and work schedules, with priority given to families whose members work in essential industries or maintain exemplary productivity records. The shared nature of these facilities requires careful coordination to prevent conflicts over cooking times and equipment usage, leading to the development of informal social hierarchies that govern access to the most desirable preparation areas and cooking implements. The rigid work schedules that govern middle hive life begin before dawn with shift assignments broadcast through the hab block communication systems, their mechanical voices cutting through the ambient noise to announce the day's labor requirements. These announcements specify not only individual work assignments, but also production quotas, safety warnings, and motivational messages designed to maintain worker morale and productivity. The standardized nature of these broadcasts creates a rhythmic pattern that structures daily life within the hab-blocks, with families organizing their activities around the predictable schedule of work announcements and shift changes. Manufactorum assignments represent the primary employment for the majority of Middle Hive residents, with vast production facilities operating continuously to meet the demands of imperial industry and military requirements. These factories occupy entire levels within the hive structure, their assembly lines and processing equipment requiring constant human supervision and maintenance despite extensive automation. Workers assigned to manufactorum duties typically spend 12-hour shifts performing repetitive tasks under harsh lighting and elevated temperatures, with brief rest periods allocated according to strict schedules that prioritize production efficiency over worker comfort. The production lines within major manufactorums create environments where individual workers become components in larger mechanical systems, their movements coordinated with automated equipment to achieve optimal output rates. Assembly workers stand at designated positions along conveyor systems that move partially completed products through various stages of construction, each worker responsible for specific tasks that must be completed within precise time limits. The repetitive nature of this work leads to physical injuries from constant repetition of identical motions, while the psychological stress of maintaining perfect timing creates mental health problems that affect significant percentages of the workforce. Quality control positions within manufactorums offer slightly better working conditions, but require higher levels of education and training that limit access to these roles. Quality inspectors examine finished products for defects and compliance with imperial standards, their decisions determining whether entire production runs meet acceptable specifications or require costly reprocessing. These positions involve less physical strain than assembly line work, but create psychological pressure from the responsibility of maintaining production quality, with mistakes potentially resulting in demotion to lower-level positions or transfer to less desirable work assignments. Processing plants that handle raw materials and waste products create some of the most hazardous working environments within the Middle Hive, exposing workers to chemical vapors, extreme temperatures, and mechanical hazards that result in higher injury rates than other industrial assignments. These facilities process everything from recycled metals to organic waste, their operations essential for maintaining the closed-loop systems that allow hive cities to sustain their massive populations. Workers in processing plants receive hazard pay supplements that provide modest improvements to their living conditions, though the health risks associated with these positions often negate the financial benefits through increased medical expenses and reduced lifespans. Administrative offices scattered throughout the middle levels provide employment for workers with literacy skills and basic mathematical competency, their duties involving the endless paperwork required to maintain imperial bureaucracy. These positions offer better working conditions than industrial assignments, but require longer training periods and often involve unpaid apprenticeships that limit access to families without sufficient resources to support non-productive members. Administrative workers process requisition forms, maintain production records, and generate the reports that flow upward through the imperial bureaucracy, their accuracy essential for maintaining the complex logistics that keep the hive functioning. The hierarchical structure within administrative offices creates opportunities for advancement that rarely exist in industrial positions, with senior clerks and supervisors earning salaries that allow for improved living conditions and access to better hab units. These advancement opportunities drive intense competition among administrative workers, leading to political maneuvering and alliance building that mirrors the activities of the noble houses on a smaller scale. Successful administrative workers often develop patron-client relationships with higher-ranking officials, trading loyalty and information for protection and career advancement opportunities. Night shift assignments in both industrial and administrative facilities operate under different conditions than day shifts, with reduced supervision and altered work rhythms that create distinct subcultures within middle hive society. Night workers often develop stronger solidarity bonds due to their shared experience of working, while the majority of the hive population sleeps, leading to informal networks that provide mutual support and protection. The reduced visibility of night shift activities also creates opportunities for black market trading and other illicit activities that supplement official wages with additional income sources. Medical care within the middle hive operates through a network of Medicae stations staffed by trained personnel who provide basic treatment for injuries and illnesses that affect the working population. These facilities focus on maintaining worker productivity rather than comprehensive health care, with treatment priorities determined by the patient's importance to essential industries and their likelihood of returning to productive work. Medicae stations maintain stocks of basic medications and surgical supplies sufficient to handle routine injuries and common illnesses, though more serious conditions often require transfer to higher-level medical facilities that may be inaccessible to ordinary workers. The triage systems employed at Medicae stations reflect the harsh realities of resource allocation within hive society, with treatment decisions based on utilitarian calculations that prioritize the greatest benefit to overall hive productivity. Workers injured in industrial accidents receive immediate attention if their injuries can be quickly repaired, while those suffering from chronic conditions or degenerative diseases may find themselves relegated to palliative care that manages symptoms without addressing underlying problems. These medical decisions create ethical dilemmas for healthcare workers who must balance their professional obligations against the resource constraints imposed by hive authorities. Preventive medicine programs within the middle hive focus on maintaining workforce health through vaccination campaigns, nutritional supplements, and safety training that reduces the incidence of preventable injuries and illnesses. These programs achieve significant success in controlling infectious diseases that could devastate densely populated hab-blocks, though their effectiveness depends on worker compliance with medical directives and the availability of resources for program implementation. The success of preventive medicine initiatives often determines whether individual Medicae stations receive additional funding and supplies, creating incentives for healthcare workers to prioritize prevention over treatment. Educational indoctrination centers serve the dual purpose of providing basic literacy and mathematical skills while instilling proper imperial values and work ethics in the next generation of hive workers. These facilities operate according to standardized curricula that emphasize practical skills needed for industrial work while incorporating religious instruction and political indoctrination designed to create loyal and productive citizens. Students attend educational sessions during their non-work hours, with class schedules coordinated with family work assignments to ensure that children receive instruction without interfering with household labor contributions. The educational curriculum within indoctrination centers focuses heavily on technical skills required for specific industries, with students tracked into specialized programs based on aptitude tests and family background. Children from families with histories of successful industrial work receive training for skilled technical positions, while those from less productive backgrounds find themselves directed toward basic labor training that prepares them for entry-level positions. This tracking system perpetuates social stratification by limiting educational opportunities based on family status rather than individual potential. Religious instruction forms a mandatory component of all educational programs, with students required to memorize imperial prayers, learn the basic tenets of the imperial creed, and participate in regular worship services that reinforce their obligations to the emperor and the Imperium. These religious lessons emphasize the virtue of hard work, the importance of obedience to authority, and the sacred nature of sacrifice for the greater good of humanity. Students who demonstrate exceptional religious devotion may receive recommendations for positions within the ecclesiarchy or other imperial organizations that offer alternatives to industrial careers. Food distribution points located throughout the middle levels provide access to the basic nutritional requirements necessary to maintain worker health and productivity, though the quality and variety of available food reflects the utilitarian approach that characterizes all aspects of middle hive life. These facilities distribute processed food products manufactured within the hive's agricultural levels, with rations calculated to provide minimum caloric requirements for workers in different industrial categories. The standardized nature of food distribution creates monotonous diets that rarely vary throughout the year, leading to nutritional deficiencies that affect worker health and productivity. The rationing systems employed at food distribution points allocate food based on work performance and family productivity records, creating incentives for maintaining high output levels while punishing those whose performance falls below acceptable standards. Families with members in essential industries receive supplemental rations that improve their nutritional status, while those whose productivity records show declining performance may find their food allocations reduced below subsistence levels. These allocation decisions create additional stress within families already struggling with overcrowded living conditions and demanding work schedules. Black market food trading operates alongside official distribution systems, providing access to higher quality foods and dietary supplements for workers who can afford premium prices or who have access to valuable trade goods. These informal markets often center around communal cooking facilities, where workers exchange surplus rations for different food types or trade work-related favors for access to imported delicacies. The authorities generally tolerate small-scale food trading as long as it does not interfere with official distribution systems or create security risks within the hab-blocks. Social stratification within the middle hive creates distinct hierarchical levels that determine access to better living conditions, work assignments, and advancement opportunities. Skilled tech adepts who maintain and repair the complex machinery that keeps the hive functioning occupy the highest positions within middle hive society, their specialized knowledge earning them respect and privileges that approach those enjoyed by minor nobility. These technical specialists often inherit their positions through family traditions that pass knowledge and training from parent to child, creating hereditary castes of skilled workers who maintain their elevated status across multiple generations. Supervisory positions within manufactorums and administrative offices provide another pathway to improved status within middle hive society, though these roles require political skills and connections that may be more important than technical competency. Supervisors coordinate the activities of multiple workers while serving as intermediaries between the workforce and higher-level management, their success dependent on maintaining productivity levels while managing the complex interpersonal dynamics that emerge within large work groups. The stress associated with supervisory responsibilities often leads to health problems and shortened lifespans, though the improved living conditions and social status associated with these positions make them highly sought after despite their drawbacks. Basic laborers who perform routine tasks without specialized skills or supervisory responsibilities form the largest segment of middle hive society, their standardized work assignments and minimal advancement opportunities creating a stable but economically vulnerable population. These workers depend entirely on their physical ability to perform assigned tasks, with injuries or age-related decline leading to reduced productivity and potential demotion to lower status positions. The competition for basic labor positions intensifies during economic downturns when reduced industrial production eliminates jobs and forces workers to accept increasingly unfavorable terms of employment. The constant threat of demotion to the underhive creates pervasive anxiety throughout middle hive society, as workers understand that declining productivity, disciplinary problems, or simple economic necessity could result in their expulsion from legitimate employment and housing. Families who lose their hab-block accommodations due to work-related problems find themselves forced into the dangerous and unregulated environment of the underhive, where survival depends on criminal activities and informal economic networks that operate outside imperial authority. This threat serves as a powerful motivational tool that encourages compliance with work requirements and social expectations, though it also creates psychological stress that affects worker performance and mental health. The descent from residential hab-blocks into the industrial sectors reveals the true beating heart of Hive City productivity, where vast manufactorums stretch across entire levels in cathedral-like halls filled with the constant thunder of machinery and the acrid smell of promethium exhaust. These production facilities operate without pause, their assembly lines and processing equipment churning out the endless stream of materials that sustain both the Hive's internal needs and the Imperium's insatiable appetite for manufactured goods. The transition between residential and industrial zones occurs gradually, with smaller workshop facilities and service industries giving way to increasingly massive production complexes that dwarf even the largest hab-blocks in their scope and complexity. The primary manufactorums that dominate the industrial levels follow standard template construct designs that have remained fundamentally unchanged for millennia, their layouts optimized for maximum efficiency in converting raw materials into finished products. These facilities typically occupy rectangular floor plans measuring several kilometers in length and width, with ceiling heights reaching up to 50 meters to accommodate the massive machinery required for heavy industrial production. The central areas of each manufactorum contain the primary production lines, while peripheral zones house support facilities including raw material storage, quality control stations, and worker rest areas that provide minimal comfort during brief break periods. Lasgun production represents one of the most critical manufacturing processes within imperial manufactorums, requiring precision assembly of power cells, focusing crystals, and barrel assemblies that must meet exacting specifications for military use. The assembly lines dedicated to lasgun production employ hundreds of workers who perform specialized tasks in carefully coordinated sequences, with each worker responsible for installing specific components before passing the weapon to the next station. The focusing crystals that form the heart of each lasgun require particularly careful handling, as even minor imperfections in their alignment can result in weapons that fail catastrophically during combat operations. The quality control procedures for military equipment involve extensive testing protocols that verify each weapon's performance against imperial standards before approval for shipment to Astra Militarum units. Testing stations equipped with specialized equipment measure the power output, beam coherence, and thermal stability of completed lasguns, while durability tests subject weapons to extreme conditions that simulate battlefield environments. Weapons that fail these tests undergo disassembly and component analysis to identify manufacturing defects, with failed components recycled back into the production process, while successful weapons receive certification marks that guarantee their reliability. Flak armor production facilities operate adjacent to weapon manufacturing areas, their assembly processes requiring different specialized equipment and worker skills, adapted to working with the layered ceramic and plasteel materials that provide protection against small arms fire and shrapnel. The manufacturing process begins with the cutting and shaping of individual armor plates according to standardized patterns that ensure proper fit and coverage for human torsos and limbs. Workers skilled in ceramic handling techniques apply protective coatings and install impact-absorbing padding that reduces the kinetic energy transferred to the wearer during impacts. The assembly of complete flak armor sets requires careful attention to joint articulation and weight distribution, as poorly fitted armor can restrict movement and reduce combat effectiveness even while providing adequate protection. Experienced armorers adjust strap lengths and padding thickness to accommodate the physical variations found among Astra Militarum recruits, while quality inspectors verify that completed armor sets meet mobility requirements through standardized movement tests. The final stages of armor production involve the application of unit markings and imperial insignia that identify the intended recipients and demonstrate proper imperial authority. Consumer goods production occupies significant portions of industrial capacity, manufacturing the basic items required for daily life within the hive's civilian population. These production lines create everything from clothing and personal hygiene products to simple tools and household implements, their output carefully calculated to meet the needs of the hive's massive population while maintaining cost efficiency. The standardized nature of consumer goods reflects both resource constraints and the practical requirements of mass production, resulting in utilitarian designs that prioritize function over aesthetic appeal. Textile production facilities process synthetic fibers and recycled materials into the basic clothing worn by the majority of hive residents, their weaving machines operating continuously to produce the enormous quantities of fabric required for billions of inhabitants. The clothing patterns used in these facilities follow standardized designs that minimize material waste while providing adequate coverage and durability for industrial workers. Color options remain limited to dyes that can be produced efficiently within the hive's chemical processing facilities, resulting in the monotonous gray and brown garments that characterize middle hive fashion. Building materials represent another crucial category of industrial production, with specialized facilities manufacturing the rockcrete, plasteel reinforcements, and structural components required for ongoing hive maintenance and expansion. The production of rockcrete involves mixing locally available minerals with synthetic binding agents in massive rotating drums that ensure proper consistency and strength characteristics. Quality control procedures for building materials include stress testing and chemical analysis that verify compliance with structural engineering requirements, as substandard materials could compromise the integrity of critical hive infrastructure. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains a significant presence within the most important production facilities, their red-robed tech priests overseeing the operation of ancient machinery and ensuring that manufacturing processes adhere to the sacred protocols preserved in their data vaults. These tech adepts possess the specialized knowledge required to maintain and repair the complex automated systems that form the backbone of imperial industry, their mechanical augmentations allowing them to interface directly with machine spirits and diagnose problems that would baffle ordinary technicians. The rituals performed by tech priests before beginning each work shift include the burning of sacred oils and the chanting of binary hymns that appease the machine spirits and ensure optimal equipment performance. The relationship between tech priests and ordinary workers involves careful protocols that maintain the mystique surrounding advanced technology while ensuring that production requirements receive proper attention. Tech adepts typically communicate with civilian workers through designated intermediaries who translate technical requirements into comprehensible instructions, as direct interaction between the mechanicus and unaugmented humans can create theological complications regarding the nature of flesh and machine. The presence of tech priests within manufactorums serves both practical and spiritual functions, as their oversight guarantees technical competency, while their religious authority reinforces the sacred nature of productive labor. Ancient machinery dating back to the dark age of technology operates within the most critical production facilities, these irreplaceable devices representing technological capabilities that modern imperial science cannot fully comprehend or replicate. The standard template constructs that govern the operation of this equipment provide detailed instructions for maintenance and operation, though the underlying principles behind their function remain mysterious even to senior tech priests. The loss of any piece of ancient machinery represents a catastrophic reduction in production capability that cannot be replaced through contemporary manufacturing techniques. The maintenance protocols for ancient equipment involve elaborate rituals that combine practical mechanical procedures with religious observances designed to maintain harmony between human operators and machine spirits. Tech priests perform daily inspections that include the application of sacred unguents to moving parts, the replacement of worn components with blessed substitutes, and the recitation of maintenance prayers that have been passed down through generations of technical adepts. These procedures require enormous amounts of time and specialized materials, but their importance to maintaining production capability makes them essential components of industrial operations. Quality control systems overseen by the Adeptus Mechanicus employ both technological testing methods and spiritual divination techniques to ensure that manufactured products meet the exacting standards required for imperial use. Tech priests equipped with specialized scanning devices examine finished goods for dimensional accuracy and material composition, while their augmented senses detect flaws that ordinary human inspectors might miss. The spiritual aspects of quality control involve prayers and ritual purifications that cleanse products of any taint that might compromise their performance in service to the emperor. The working conditions within industrial sectors expose millions of workers to hazards that range from routine occupational dangers to exotic threats created by advanced manufacturing processes. Chemical exposure represents one of the most pervasive risks, as many production processes involve substances that can cause respiratory damage, skin irritation, or more serious health effects through prolonged contact. The ventilation systems designed to remove toxic vapors from work areas often prove inadequate for the volumes of chemicals used in large-scale manufacturing, resulting in atmospheric contamination that affects entire industrial levels. Heavy machinery accidents occur with disturbing regularity despite safety protocols designed to protect workers from moving equipment and high-energy processes. The massive scale of industrial equipment creates crushing hazards when workers venture too close to automated systems, while the high temperatures generated by metal processing and chemical reactions cause severe burns among personnel who lack adequate protective equipment. The constant noise generated by industrial operations leads to hearing loss among long-term workers, while the vibrations from heavy machinery cause structural damage to nearby hab-blocks and contribute to the deterioration of worker health. Toxic chemical exposure affects workers in processing facilities where raw materials undergo transformation through processes that release dangerous byproducts into the working environment. The solvents used in metal cleaning operations can cause neurological damage through inhalation or skin contact, while the acids employed in chemical processing create respiratory hazards that accumulate over years of exposure. Protective equipment provided to workers often proves inadequate for the actual conditions encountered in production facilities, as cost considerations limit the quality and availability of safety gear that could prevent long-term health problems. The ever-present threat of sabotage by heretical cults creates an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia within industrial facilities, as production managers struggle to identify potential infiltrators while maintaining the productivity levels demanded by imperial authorities. Chaos cults seeking to disrupt imperial production capabilities target critical manufacturing equipment and key personnel. Their sabotage efforts designed to create maximum damage with minimal risk of detection. The sophisticated nature of industrial systems makes them vulnerable to subtle forms of sabotage that can cause catastrophic failures while appearing to result from mechanical malfunctions or operator error. Security measures designed to prevent cult infiltration include background investigations of all workers, surveillance systems that monitor activity within sensitive areas, and loyalty testing procedures that attempt to identify individuals with questionable allegiances. These security protocols create additional bureaucratic overhead that slows production processes while generating enormous amounts of documentation that must be reviewed and stored according to imperial regulations. The psychological pressure created by constant surveillance affects worker morale and productivity, as employees struggle to perform their duties while avoiding actions that might be interpreted as suspicious by security personnel. Counterintelligence operations conducted by imperial authorities within industrial sectors involve the use of undercover agents who pose as ordinary workers while gathering information about potential cult activities. These operatives receive specialized training in recognizing the signs of heretical influence and the communication methods used by cult networks to coordinate their activities. The presence of undercover agents creates additional paranoia among legitimate workers who cannot distinguish between genuine colleagues and imperial spies, leading to social fragmentation that undermines the solidarity necessary for effective industrial operations. The complex supply chains that support industrial production require coordination between multiple levels of the Hive hierarchy, from the mining operations that extract raw materials to the transportation networks that deliver finished goods to their final destinations. Raw material flows begin in the deep mining levels, where specialized equipment extracts ores, minerals, and other substances required for manufacturing processes. These materials undergo initial processing in facilities located near the extraction sites, where crushing, sorting, and preliminary refinement reduce transportation costs while preparing materials for further processing in higher-level facilities. Transportation systems within the Hive include massive cargo elevators that move materials between levels, conveyor networks that carry goods across horizontal distances, and specialized vehicles designed to navigate the narrow passages and steep gradients found throughout the Hive structure. The elevator systems represent critical infrastructure that requires constant maintenance and security protection, as their failure could disrupt supply chains and isolate entire levels from essential resources. The scheduling of elevator usage involves complex algorithms that balance competing demands for transportation capacity while ensuring that critical materials receive priority treatment. Processing centers located throughout the middle levels transform raw materials into the intermediate products required for final manufacturing processes. Their specialized equipment designed to handle specific types of materials and production requirements. Metal processing facilities use massive furnaces and rolling mills to convert raw ores into the steel and aluminum alloys used in construction and manufacturing, while chemical processing plants transform organic and synthetic feedstocks into the plastics, solvents, and other chemical products required for industrial production. The coordination between processing centers and final manufacturing facilities requires precise timing and quality control to ensure that materials arrive when needed and meet the specifications required for their intended applications. Distribution networks that move finished goods from manufactorums to their final destinations operate according to carefully planned schedules that coordinate with shipping facilities, military depots, and civilian distribution centers. The packaging and labeling of finished products follow standardized procedures that ensure proper identification and handling throughout the distribution process, while tracking systems monitor the movement of goods to prevent theft and ensure timely delivery. The complexity of these distribution networks requires enormous amounts of coordination and communication between different organizations and administrative levels. Off-world shipping represents the final stage of the supply chain for products destined for other imperial worlds, requiring coordination with orbital facilities and interstellar transportation networks that operate beyond the direct control of Hive authorities. The preparation of goods for interstellar transport involves specialized packaging that protects products from the harsh conditions encountered during warp travel, while documentation requirements ensure compliance with imperial trade regulations and customs procedures. The scheduling of off-world shipments depends on the availability of transport vessels and the priorities established by sector authorities for different categories of goods. The economic impact of industrial production extends throughout Hive society, creating employment opportunities for millions of workers while generating the tax revenues that fund essential services and infrastructure maintenance. The wages paid to industrial workers provide the purchasing power that supports consumer goods markets and service industries, while the profits generated by successful production facilities fund expansion projects and technological improvements. The interdependence between industrial production and other sectors of the Hive economy creates vulnerabilities that can propagate throughout the entire system when production problems or supply chain disruptions occur. Resource allocation decisions made by Hive authorities determine the distribution of raw materials, energy, and labor between competing industrial priorities, with military production typically receiving precedence over civilian goods when resources become scarce. These allocation decisions reflect both imperial mandates and local political considerations, as powerful noble houses and influential organizations lobby for favorable treatment of their preferred industries. The competition for limited resources creates tensions between different industrial sectors and can lead to production bottlenecks that affect the entire hive economy. The maintenance of order within hive cities requires multiple layers of law enforcement, each operating within carefully defined jurisdictions and wielding different levels of authority over the teeming billions who inhabit these vertical worlds. The Adeptus Archives stands at the apex of this enforcement hierarchy, their black armored judges representing the ultimate authority of imperial law within the confines of each hive. These grim enforcers operate from fortress precincts that rise like adamantium mountains from the middle levels, their brutalist architecture serving both as symbols of imperial justice and as defensive positions capable of withstanding siege warfare from rebellious populations. The fortress precincts themselves represent some of the most heavily fortified structures within any hive city, their walls constructed from layered adamantium and rockcrete that can resist direct artillery bombardment while providing secure bases for Arbites operations. These facilities typically occupy entire city blocks, their perimeters defended by automated weapon systems and force field barriers that activate during emergency situations. The main entrance gates stand 20 meters high and incorporate blast doors capable of sealing the fortress against chemical attacks or atmospheric contamination, while hidden sally ports provide emergency egress routes that allow Arbites forces to deploy rapidly throughout the surrounding areas. Within the fortress precincts, detention facilities extend deep underground in multi-level complexes that can house thousands of prisoners awaiting trial or serving sentences for crimes against imperial law. These detention blocks follow standardized designs that prioritize security over prisoner comfort, with individual cells measuring 2 meters by 3 meters and containing only basic sanitation facilities and a sleeping platform. The cell blocks radiate outward from central guard stations that allow constant surveillance of prisoner activities, while automated systems monitor vital signs and movement patterns to detect escape attempts or medical emergencies. The interrogation chambers located within Arbites fortress precincts incorporate both technological and psychological methods for extracting information from suspects and prisoners. These facilities include specialized equipment for conducting neural scans, truth serum administration, and other investigative techniques that operate within the boundaries established by imperial law. The chambers themselves feature reinforced walls that contain sound and prevent external interference, while recording systems document all proceedings for later review by senior judges and legal authorities. Armories within fortress precincts contain vast stocks of specialized equipment designed for crowd control and urban warfare, including riot suppressors, shock mauls, and combat shotguns loaded with non-lethal ammunition for situations requiring the dispersal of unruly crowds without excessive casualties. The heavier weapons stored in these facilities include grenade launchers, flamethrowers, and even vehicle-mounted weapon systems that can be deployed during major civil disturbances or insurgent activities. Ammunition stocks include specialized rounds designed for different tactical situations, from rubber bullets for crowd control to armor-piercing shells for use against heavily fortified criminal strongholds. The patrol squads that deploy from fortress precincts operate in heavily armed formations designed to project imperial authority while maintaining the capability to respond to serious threats with overwhelming force. These squads typically consist of 6 to 8 Arbites equipped with carapace armor, combat shotguns, and shock mauls, their black uniforms and distinctive helmet designs immediately recognizable to Hive residents as symbols of imperial justice. The patrol routes followed by these squads cover critical infrastructure points, major transportation hubs, and areas with histories of civil unrest, their presence serving both as deterrent and as rapid response capability for emerging situations. Vehicle support for Arbeits operations includes specialized transports designed for urban warfare and crowd control operations within the confined spaces of Hive City levels. Rhino armored personnel carriers modified for law enforcement use feature enhanced communication equipment and non-lethal weapon systems, while their reinforced hulls provide protection against improvised explosive devices and small arms fire commonly encountered during civil disturbances. The repressor tanks employed by Arbeits forces mount water cannons and tear gas dispensers alongside traditional weapons, allowing for graduated responses to different levels of civil unrest. The jurisdiction of the Adeptus Archives extends specifically to crimes that threaten imperial authority or violate the fundamental laws that govern human behavior throughout the Imperium. These crimes include heresy, sedition, rebellion against lawful authority, and violations of imperial trade regulations that could affect the broader economy. Murder, theft, and other common crimes fall under local jurisdiction unless they involve imperial personnel or facilities, creating a complex legal framework that requires careful coordination between different law enforcement agencies. Heresy investigations represent perhaps the most critical function performed by Arbeits forces, as the detection and suppression of religious deviation protects Hive populations from the corrupting influence of chaos cults and other dangerous belief systems. These investigations often begin with reports from informants or suspicious activities detected by surveillance systems, leading to comprehensive operations that may involve weeks of covert observation before arrests occur. The evidence-gathering procedures used in heresy cases require specialized training in recognizing cult symbols, ritual implements, and other indicators of religious corruption that ordinary law enforcement personnel might overlook. Sedition cases involve activities designed to undermine imperial authority or encourage resistance to lawful government, including the distribution of prohibited literature, organization of unauthorized political meetings, and attempts to incite rebellion among the working population. The investigation of sedition requires careful analysis of communication patterns, social networks, and ideological influences that may indicate organized resistance movements. Arbeits investigators employ sophisticated surveillance techniques and undercover operations to penetrate seditious organizations and gather evidence for prosecution. Economic crimes that fall under Arbeits' jurisdiction include tax evasion on a massive scale, black market trading in prohibited goods, and corruption involving imperial officials or resources. These investigations often require coordination with Adeptus Administratum personnel who possess the specialized knowledge necessary to analyze complex financial records and identify irregular transactions. The prosecution of economic crimes can result in sentences ranging from heavy fines and asset forfeiture to execution for the most serious violations involving military supplies or strategic resources. Local planetary defense force units operate alongside Arbeits forces, but maintain separate command structures and areas of responsibility focused on external threats and large-scale security operations. These PDF forces typically recruit from the Hive's population and receive training in conventional military tactics adapted for urban warfare environments. Their equipment includes standard Imperial Guard weapons and vehicles, though often of older patterns or locally manufactured variants that may lack the sophisticated features found in frontline military units. The organization of PDF forces within Hive Cities follows regimental structures that divide responsibilities between different types of units specialized for specific threats and operational requirements. Infantry regiments provide the basic manpower for patrol duties and crowd control operations, their soldiers equipped with las guns, flak armor, and basic communication equipment that allows coordination with other security forces. Armored regiments operate vehicles ranging from Chimera transports to Leman Russ battle tanks, their heavy weapons providing the firepower necessary to suppress major civil disturbances or repel external attacks. Artillery units within PDF forces maintain positions on the upper levels of Hive cities, where their weapons can provide fire support for ground operations while defending against aerial attacks. These positions include both traditional artillery pieces and more sophisticated air defense systems capable of engaging aircraft and orbital threats. The placement of artillery positions requires careful consideration of structural integrity and civilian safety, as the massive recoil forces generated by heavy weapons can damage Hive infrastructure if not properly managed. Hive security forces represent the most numerous law enforcement personnel within each city, their responsibilities encompassing routine patrol duties, traffic control, and the investigation of common crimes that do not require Arbite's intervention. These forces recruit exclusively from local populations and receive training focused on crowd psychology, basic investigative techniques, and the use of non-lethal weapons for subduing suspects without causing permanent injury. Their equipment typically includes riot gear, shock prods, and basic protective armor sufficient for dealing with ordinary criminal activities. The training programs for Hive security personnel emphasize de-escalation techniques and community relations that help maintain public order without resorting to excessive force. These programs include instruction in recognizing signs of mental illness, substance abuse, and other conditions that may contribute to criminal behavior, allowing security officers to respond appropriately to different types of situations. The psychological screening of security recruits attempts to identify individuals with appropriate temperaments for law enforcement work, while excluding those with tendencies toward corruption or excessive violence. Riot control represents one of the most challenging aspects of Hive security operations, requiring coordinated responses from multiple agencies and careful application of force to disperse crowds without triggering larger disturbances. The tactics employed during riot situations include the use of water cannons, tear gas, and sonic weapons designed to disorient and disperse crowds while minimizing casualties. The deployment of riot control forces follows established protocols that prioritize the protection of critical infrastructure while containing disturbances within specific areas to prevent their spread throughout the Hive. Crowd control weapons used by security forces include shock mauls that deliver electrical charges sufficient to incapacitate suspects without causing permanent damage, though repeated exposure can result in cardiac problems and neurological damage. Riot suppressors fire foam projectiles that expand on impact to entangle and immobilize multiple targets simultaneously, while their non-lethal nature makes them suitable for use in crowded areas where conventional weapons might cause excessive collateral damage. Net launchers provide another option for capturing fleeing suspects or containing small groups of rioters without resorting to lethal force. The legal system governing Hive cities operates through a complex hierarchy of courts and tribunals that handle different categories of crimes according to their severity and jurisdiction. Local magistrates deal with minor infractions such as theft, assault, and public disorder violations, their authority limited to imposing fines, community service, and short-term imprisonment in local detention facilities. These magistrates typically receive their appointments through local political processes and may lack formal legal training, relying instead on standardized sentencing guidelines and advice from more experienced legal personnel. Arbitrator courts handle more serious crimes that require formal legal proceedings, but do not rise to the level of imperial jurisdiction. These courts follow established legal procedures that include the right to legal representation, presentation of evidence, and formal sentencing hearings that determine appropriate punishments for convicted defendants. The judges who preside over arbitrator courts receive extensive training in imperial law and legal procedure, their decisions subject to appeal through higher courts when circumstances warrant additional review. Tribunal proceedings represent the highest level of local legal authority, handling cases that involve multiple defendants, complex legal issues, or crimes that approach the threshold of imperial jurisdiction. These proceedings may involve panels of multiple judges and can extend over weeks or months as evidence is presented and legal arguments are heard. The sentences imposed by tribunals can include lengthy prison terms, asset forfeiture, and in extreme cases, exile to penal colonies or execution for the most serious offenses. Inquisitorial attention represents the ultimate level of legal authority within the Imperium, triggered by crimes involving heresy, alien influence, or threats to imperial security that exceed the capabilities of local law enforcement. When Inquisitors become involved in Hive City investigations, their authority supersedes all local jurisdictions and legal procedures, allowing them to requisition resources, detain suspects indefinitely, and employ investigative methods that would be prohibited under normal circumstances. The involvement of the Inquisition often results in widespread arrests and interrogations that can disrupt entire sectors of Hive society while rooting out perceived threats to imperial security. The procedures followed during inquisitorial investigations include the establishment of secure facilities for questioning suspects and analyzing evidence, often requiring the temporary evacuation of civilian areas to prevent contamination or interference. Inquisitors employ specialized equipment for detecting psychic phenomena, alien technology, and other exotic threats that ordinary law enforcement personnel cannot identify or safely handle. The secrecy surrounding inquisitorial operations means that local authorities often remain unaware of the specific reasons for investigations or the ultimate disposition of cases handled by these imperial agents. Surveillance systems monitoring Hive populations operate through networks of technological and human assets that provide comprehensive coverage of public areas and critical infrastructure points. Pict recorders installed throughout public spaces capture visual records of activities that can be reviewed by security personnel to identify suspicious behavior or criminal activities. These recording systems operate continuously and store vast amounts of data that require sophisticated analysis techniques to identify relevant information among the countless hours of routine footage. The placement of surveillance equipment follows strategic principles that maximize coverage while minimizing blind spots where criminal activities might occur undetected. Critical locations such as transportation hubs, government facilities, and industrial areas receive priority for surveillance installation, while residential areas may have more limited coverage due to resource constraints and privacy considerations. The maintenance of surveillance equipment requires specialized technical personnel who ensure that recording systems remain operational despite the harsh environmental conditions found throughout Hive cities. Vox intercept stations monitor communication networks for suspicious activities, unauthorized transmissions, and evidence of criminal coordination that might indicate organized threats to Hive security. These facilities employ sophisticated equipment capable of intercepting and analyzing various forms of electronic communication, from simple voice transmissions to encrypted data transfers that require specialized decryption techniques. The personnel operating Vox intercept stations receive training in communication analysis and pattern recognition that allows them to identify potentially dangerous activities among the enormous volume of routine communications. The legal framework governing communication surveillance includes provisions for judicial oversight and limitations on the types of communications that can be monitored without specific authorization from appropriate authorities. Personal communications between family members and routine business transactions typically receive protection from surveillance, while communications involving suspected criminal activities or threats to imperial security may be subject to comprehensive monitoring and analysis. The balance between security requirements and individual privacy rights creates ongoing tensions that require careful management by legal and security authorities. Networks of informants provide human intelligence that complements technological surveillance systems by offering insights into criminal activities and social dynamics that electronic monitoring cannot detect. These informants include both paid agents who provide information in exchange for monetary compensation and voluntary sources who report suspicious activities out of civic duty or personal motivations. The recruitment and management of informant networks requires careful attention to operational security and source protection to prevent exposure of valuable intelligence assets. The training provided to informants includes instruction in recognizing signs of criminal activity, methods for safely reporting information to authorities, and techniques for maintaining cover identities that protect them from retaliation by criminal organizations. The information provided by informants undergoes verification procedures that attempt to confirm accuracy and identify potential disinformation designed to mislead law enforcement efforts. The protection of informant identities represents a critical security concern that requires sophisticated procedures for communication and compensation that minimize the risk of exposure. Counter-surveillance activities conducted by criminal organizations attempt to identify and neutralize law enforcement monitoring efforts through technical means and human intelligence operations. These activities include the use of signal jammers to disrupt electronic surveillance, the employment of counter-surveillance specialists to detect monitoring equipment, and the infiltration of law enforcement agencies to gather information about ongoing investigations. The sophistication of counter-surveillance efforts varies significantly between different criminal organizations, with well-funded groups employing techniques that rival those used by Imperial intelligence services. The ongoing technological competition between law enforcement surveillance capabilities and criminal counter-surveillance efforts drives continuous improvements in equipment and techniques used by both sides. Surveillance technology advances include more sophisticated recording equipment, improved signal processing capabilities, and enhanced encryption methods that protect law enforcement communications from interception. Criminal organizations respond with more advanced jamming equipment, better operational security procedures, and increased use of human couriers and other low-technology communication methods that are difficult to monitor electronically. The spiritual architecture that dominates Hive Cities reaches toward the heavens with the same relentless ambition that drives their secular construction, creating monuments to faith that rival even the noble spires in their grandeur and exceed them in their emotional impact upon the masses below. The Cathedral of St. Drusus on Scintilla rises through 47 levels of the primary hive, its flying buttresses and Gothic arches creating a vertical symphony of devotion that can be seen from every residential level within a 50-kilometer radius. The main nave alone stretches for 3 kilometers in length and reaches heights of 200 meters, its vaulted ceiling decorated with frescoes depicting the emperor's greatest victories against the forces of darkness. These towering cathedrals serve as the focal points around which entire hive sectors organize their daily rhythms, their massive bronze bells marking the canonical hours that structure prayer, work, and rest for billions of faithful citizens. The Basilica of the Golden Throne on Necromunda incorporates 17 separate bell towers, each one tuned to different frequencies that combine during major festivals to create harmonic resonances that can be heard throughout the entire hive structure. The largest of these bells weighs over 300 tons and requires a team of 20 servitors operating in perfect synchronization to ring it during the most solemn occasions of the imperial calendar. The construction of these sacred edifices often spans centuries and involves the labor of entire generations, with master craftsmen passing their skills to apprentices who continue work on projects that began before their births and will continue long after their deaths. The stonework adorning the Cathedral of St. Euphrates on Malphi demonstrates techniques that date back to the earliest days of imperial expansion, with each carved figure and decorative element representing thousands of hours of meticulous labor by artisans whose names have been forgotten, but whose devotion remains immortalized in stone. The stained glass windows that filter light through these sacred spaces incorporate rare minerals and synthetic crystals that create specific color combinations believed to enhance spiritual contemplation and religious experience. Shrine temples scattered throughout the middle and lower levels provide more intimate spaces for daily worship and community gathering, their smaller scale allowing for the personal interactions that bind hive communities together through shared faith. These facilities typically occupy single levels within hab-blocks or converted industrial spaces, their interiors transformed through the dedication of local congregations who contribute materials and labor to create sacred environments within the harsh utilitarian architecture of hive life. The Shrine of the Blessed Martyr Alanius in Hive Primus features walls covered with hand-painted icons created by local artists over decades of devotional work, each image telling part of the larger story of human sacrifice and divine protection that defines imperial theology. The altar spaces within these shrine temples incorporate relics and sacred objects that connect local congregations to the broader imperial faith, from fragments of stone taken from Terra itself to pieces of equipment blessed by living saints during their earthly ministrations. The Shrine of Saint Sabbat on Vervenhive houses a lasgun barrel that allegedly fired the shot that killed the heretic commander during the siege of that world, its metal surface worn smooth by the touch of countless pilgrims who seek the saint's intercession in their daily struggles. These relics undergo careful authentication procedures conducted by ecclesiarchy officials who verify their provenance and spiritual significance before approving their veneration by the faithful. The daily services conducted within shrine temples follow liturgical patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for millennia, their familiar rhythms providing psychological comfort and spiritual stability to populations living under constant stress and uncertainty. Morning prayers begin before dawn with the lighting of sacred candles and the recitation of the Litany of Devotion, while evening services conclude with communal singing of hymns that reinforce the bonds between congregation members and their shared commitment to imperial values. The participation of entire families in these services creates intergenerational connections that strengthen community cohesion and provide support networks for individuals facing personal crises or economic hardship. The Adeptus Ministorum maintains direct control over all major religious institutions within Hive Cities, their hierarchical structure ensuring that local religious practices conform to orthodox imperial doctrine while providing channels for spiritual guidance and moral instruction. Cardinal Bray of the Scintilla Diocese oversees the religious activities of 17 separate Hive cities, his authority extending from the appointment of local priests to the approval of new construction projects for religious facilities. The administrative complexity of managing religious affairs across such vast populations requires extensive bureaucratic structures that parallel the secular government in their scope and influence. Ecclesiarchy officials conduct regular inspections of religious facilities to ensure compliance with doctrinal requirements and identify potential sources of heretical deviation before they can spread throughout local congregations. These inspections include reviews of sermon content, examination of religious artwork and decorations, and interviews with congregation members to assess their understanding of proper imperial theology. The discovery of doctrinal irregularities can result in the immediate removal of local priests, the closure of affected facilities, and comprehensive re-education programs for congregation members who may have been exposed to incorrect teachings. The training of new priests takes place in seminaries located within the upper levels of major Hive cities, their curricula combining theological instruction with practical skills needed for ministering to Hive populations. Students spend years studying the approved texts of imperial doctrine, learning the proper procedures for conducting religious services, and developing the rhetorical skills necessary for delivering effective sermons to diverse audiences. The psychological preparation for priesthood includes exposure to the harsh realities of Hive life and training in recognizing the signs of heretical influence that threaten the spiritual welfare of their future congregations. Mandatory prayer sessions punctuate the daily schedules of all Hive residents, their timing coordinated with work shifts and meal periods to ensure maximum participation while minimizing disruption to essential activities. The morning devotions broadcast through Hive communication systems reach every Hab unit and workplace simultaneously, their standardized prayers reinforcing common beliefs and shared identity among populations that might otherwise fragment along economic or social lines. Workers in manufactorums pause their activities during these broadcasts to recite the prescribed prayers, their collective voices creating a chorus of devotion that sanctifies their labor and dedicates their efforts to the emperor's glory. The enforcement of prayer attendance involves monitoring systems that track participation rates across different sectors and demographic groups, with poor attendance triggering investigations into potential religious apathy or heretical influence. Supervisors in workplaces maintain records of employee participation in mandatory prayers, while residential area monitors document attendance at community prayer sessions held in shrine temples and public spaces. Individuals who consistently fail to participate in required religious observances face questioning by local ecclesiarchy officials and may be required to undergo additional religious instruction to address their apparent lack of devotion. Religious education programs operate alongside secular training in schools and indoctrination centers, their instruction designed to instill proper theological understanding and emotional commitment to imperial values from the earliest possible age. Children learn the fundamental prayers and catechisms that form the foundation of imperial faith, while older students receive more sophisticated instruction in theological concepts and moral reasoning that prepares them for adult participation in religious community life. The integration of religious and secular education ensures that all aspects of learning reinforce the central importance of faith in human existence and the divine nature of imperial authority. The identification of heretical beliefs requires constant vigilance from both religious authorities and ordinary citizens who report suspicious activities or conversations that might indicate dangerous theological deviations. The signs of potential heresy include unusual interest in forbidden texts, participation in unauthorized religious gatherings, and expressions of doubt about fundamental imperial doctrines regarding the emperor's divine nature or humanity's role in the galaxy. Training programs for ecclesiarchy officials include instruction in recognizing subtle forms of heretical thinking that may not manifest as overt rebellion, but could gradually undermine faith and loyalty among affected populations. Confession procedures provide mechanisms for identifying and addressing heretical thoughts before they develop into more serious threats to community spiritual welfare. Priests conducting confession sessions receive training in psychological techniques that encourage honest disclosure of doubts and temptations, while maintaining the trust necessary for effective spiritual counseling. The information gathered during confessions undergoes careful evaluation to distinguish between normal human weakness and genuine heretical inclination, with serious cases referred to higher authorities for investigation and possible intervention. The punishment of confirmed heresy varies according to the severity of the offense and the perceived threat to community welfare, ranging from public penance and re-education to execution for the most dangerous forms of theological corruption. Public penance ceremonies serve both punitive and educational functions, demonstrating the consequences of religious deviation while providing opportunities for the community to reaffirm their collective commitment to orthodox beliefs. The spectacle of heretics performing acts of contrition reinforces social pressure for religious conformity while satisfying the emotional need for justice among populations who feel threatened by theological challenges to their worldview. The imperial calendar structures hive life around religious festivals and ceremonies that provide regular breaks from the grinding routine of industrial labor, while reinforcing the theological concepts that justify imperial authority and human suffering. The Feast of the Emperor's Ascension transforms entire hive sectors into celebrations of humanity's divine destiny, with processions, special meals, and community gatherings that create shared experiences of joy and spiritual renewal. These festivals require months of preparation by religious authorities and community volunteers who organize decorations, coordinate food distribution, and arrange entertainment that combines religious instruction with popular celebration. The Day of Martyrs commemorates the countless saints who sacrificed their lives in service to the emperor, their stories providing moral examples that inspire contemporary citizens to accept hardship and danger in pursuit of higher purposes. Local congregations often focus their celebrations on particular saints whose lives relate to their specific circumstances, with mining communities honoring Saint Jasmine, who died protecting excavation workers from a demon incursion, while manufacturing workers venerate Saint Macharius, who blessed the production lines with his presence during a critical wartime production campaign. These focused celebrations create personal connections between historical figures and contemporary struggles that make abstract theological concepts more emotionally compelling. Harvest festivals celebrate the successful completion of production quotas and the provision of sustenance for hive populations, their religious significance emphasizing humanity's dependence on divine providence and the sacred nature of productive labor. These celebrations include the blessing of food supplies, the recognition of outstanding workers whose dedication exemplifies proper imperial values, and communal meals that strengthen social bonds within residential communities. The religious ceremonies associated with harvest festivals incorporate prayers of thanksgiving that acknowledge the emperor's protection and guidance in enabling human survival within hostile environments. Purification rituals mark the beginning of new production cycles and the cleansing of facilities that may have been contaminated by heretical influence or spiritual corruption. These ceremonies involve the burning of sacred incense, the sprinkling of blessed water throughout affected areas, and the recitation of prayers that invoke divine protection against the forces of darkness that constantly threaten human endeavors. The participation of entire work crews in purification rituals creates shared experiences that reinforce group solidarity while providing psychological preparation for the challenges of the coming work period. The Adeptus Archives maintains a significant presence within major hive cities, their warrior nuns serving as both spiritual exemplars and military forces capable of responding to serious threats against religious institutions and Orthodox faith. The Convent of the Sacred rose on Ophelia's 7 houses over 2,000 Sisters of Battle, whose duties include the protection of major shrines, the investigation of heretical activities, and the provision of military support for ecclesiarchy operations that require armed intervention. Their distinctive power armor and flamers make them instantly recognizable symbols of imperial faith's militant aspect, while their unwavering devotion provides inspiration for ordinary citizens who struggle with doubt and temptation. The training regimens followed by Adeptus Archives combine intensive physical conditioning with spiritual discipline that creates warriors capable of facing the most dangerous enemies of humanity without fear or hesitation. Sister novices spend years mastering combat techniques while memorizing vast portions of imperial scripture, their education designed to integrate martial skills with theological understanding in ways that make them effective both as soldiers and as spiritual leaders. The psychological conditioning that enables Sisters of Battle to face demons and heretics includes meditation practices that strengthen mental resistance to corruption, while maintaining the emotional balance necessary for making tactical decisions under extreme stress. The equipment employed by Adeptus Archives reflects their dual role as warriors and religious figures, with weapons and armor that incorporate sacred symbols and blessed materials alongside advanced military technology. Bolters carried by battle sisters fire blessed ammunition that has been consecrated through religious ceremonies, while their power armor includes integrated shrine elements that provide spiritual protection alongside physical defense. The flamers that serve as signature weapons for many sororitas units represent the purifying fire of faith that cleanses corruption and burns away the taint of heresy wherever it is encountered. Combat operations conducted by Adeptus Archives within Hive Cities require careful coordination with local authorities to minimize collateral damage while achieving decisive results against heretical threats. The urban warfare tactics employed by sister squads emphasize rapid movement through confined spaces, coordinated fire support, and the psychological impact of their presence on both enemies and allied forces. The sight of power-armored nuns advancing through hive corridors while chanting battle hymns creates powerful morale effects that can break enemy resistance and inspire friendly forces to greater acts of courage and devotion. Fraterist militia units provide additional military support for ecclesiarchy operations, while offering opportunities for ordinary citizens to demonstrate their faith through armed service to the imperial creed. These volunteer forces recruit from among the most devout members of Hive populations, their training focusing on basic military skills and religious indoctrination that prepares them for combat against heretical enemies. The equipment provided to Fraterus militia typically includes auto guns, improvised armor, and religious symbols that identify their allegiance while providing modest protection during combat operations. The organization of Fraterus militia follows military structures adapted for irregular warfare and urban combat environments, with small units capable of operating independently while maintaining coordination with larger ecclesiarchy forces. Squad leaders receive additional training in tactical planning and communication procedures that enable effective coordination with professional military units during joint operations. The flexibility of militia organization allows for rapid expansion during crises while maintaining the religious focus that distinguishes these forces from purely secular military units. Training exercises conducted by Fraterus militia combine military drill with religious ceremony, creating experiences that reinforce both combat skills and spiritual commitment among volunteer soldiers. These exercises include practice in urban warfare techniques, familiarity with weapons and equipment, and exposure to the psychological stresses of combat through realistic simulation scenarios. The religious aspects of training include group prayers before exercises, blessing ceremonies for weapons and equipment, and instruction in the theological justifications for violence against enemies of the faith. Deployment of Fraterus militia occurs primarily during major heretical uprisings or cult activities that threaten the spiritual welfare of Hive populations, their local knowledge and religious motivation making them effective supplements to professional military forces. These deployments often involve house-to-house searches for cult members, the protection of religious facilities during periods of unrest, and crowd control operations during religious festivals or public ceremonies. The presence of armed civilians fighting for religious causes creates powerful symbolic effects that demonstrate the depth of popular commitment to imperial faith while deterring potential heretics from open rebellion. The investigation of corruption within religious hierarchies requires specialized procedures that balance the need for accountability with respect for ecclesiastical authority and the preservation of faith among ordinary believers. Internal affairs units within the ecclesiarchy employ investigators trained in detecting signs of moral corruption, theological deviation, and financial irregularities that might compromise the effectiveness of religious institutions. These investigations often involve surveillance of suspected individuals, analysis of financial records, and interviews with subordinates and congregation members who might have observed suspicious activities. Counterintelligence operations protect religious institutions from infiltration by heretical cults, enemy agents, and other hostile forces that seek to corrupt or destroy imperial faith from within. These operations include background investigations of new clergy members, security assessments of religious facilities, and the development of procedures for detecting and responding to infiltration attempts. The sophisticated nature of modern threats requires religious authorities to employ advanced security techniques while maintaining the openness and accessibility that enable effective ministry to Hive populations. The prosecution of corruption cases within religious hierarchies follows specialized legal procedures that account for the unique nature of ecclesiastical crimes and the need to maintain public confidence in religious institutions. These procedures include ecclesiastical courts with jurisdiction over clergy members, specialized investigation techniques that respect religious privileges while gathering evidence, and sentencing guidelines that emphasize rehabilitation and restoration of proper religious function. The public nature of many corruption cases requires careful management of information release to prevent damage to overall faith while ensuring appropriate accountability for wrongdoing. The economic lifeblood of every Hive city flows through carefully controlled channels dominated by ancient guild houses whose monopolistic practices have shaped trade patterns for millennia. These merchant dynasties trace their origins to the earliest colonial charters and trade compacts established during humanity's expansion across the galaxy. Their hereditary rights to specific commodities and trade routes protected by legal frameworks that predate the current imperial government by thousands of years. House Kryn's monopoly over rare earth extraction on Necromunda stems from mining rights granted during the 32nd millennium, while the Mercator Sanguis on Scintilla controls all off-world food imports through agreements signed with the original rogue trader expeditions that established the sector's primary trade networks. The guild houses operate from massive commercial complexes that rival the noble spires in their architectural grandeur, their trading floors and warehouse facilities occupying entire levels within the middle sections of each hive. The Mercantile Exchange on Gunmetal City features a central trading floor that spans 3 kilometers in diameter, its vaulted ceiling rising 40 meters above thousands of merchant stalls, where representatives conduct negotiations for everything from basic foodstuffs to exotic technologies imported from distant sectors. The acoustic design of these trading spaces amplifies voices while dampening background noise, creating an environment where shouted bids and offers can be heard clearly across vast distances despite the constant din of commercial activity. Automated ticker systems display current prices for standardized commodities throughout the trading floors, their mechanical displays clicking and whirring as market values fluctuate according to supply availability and demand pressures. These price boards track hundreds of different goods categories, from basic protein rations and recycled water to sophisticated technological components and rare mineral extracts. The information displayed on these systems flows from data networks that connect trading centers across multiple star systems, allowing local merchants to adjust their pricing strategies based on market conditions throughout entire sectors of imperial space. The Guild House of Kryn maintains exclusive control over the distribution of rare metals essential for advanced technological production, their warehouses containing stockpiles of adamantium, ceramite, and other strategic materials that require specialized storage conditions to prevent degradation. These storage facilities incorporate climate control systems that maintain precise temperature and humidity levels while protecting valuable materials from contamination by atmospheric pollutants. Security measures protecting these warehouses include armed guards, surveillance systems, and defensive turrets capable of repelling organized theft attempts by criminal gangs or rival merchant houses. Promethium distribution represents one of the most lucrative and strategically important monopolies within Hive commerce, as this refined fuel powers everything from personal vehicles to massive industrial machinery. The Guild House of Helmor controls promethium imports to Necromunda through exclusive contracts with off-world refineries, their storage tanks and distribution networks extending throughout the Hive's transportation infrastructure. The volatile nature of promethium requires specialized handling procedures and safety equipment that adds significant costs to distribution operations, while creating barriers that prevent smaller merchants from competing in this essential market. Food distribution monopolies, wielded by major guild houses, determine the nutritional welfare of billions of Hive residents. Their control over agricultural imports and processing facilities, giving them enormous influence over local political decisions. The Victuals Guild on Scintilla manages the importation of exotic foods from agri-worlds throughout the Calixis sector, their climate-controlled storage facilities preserving delicate fruits and vegetables during interstellar transport that can take months to complete. The pricing policies established by food distribution guilds must balance profit maximization against the social stability requirements that prevent widespread hunger from triggering civil unrest. Textile and clothing monopolies controlled by guild houses shape not only the economic landscape, but also the social hierarchies that distinguish different classes within Hive society. The Mercator Textiles maintains exclusive rights to import luxury fabrics from distant worlds, their showrooms displaying materials that cost more than most workers earn in entire lifetimes. The contrast between the rough synthetic fabrics available to ordinary citizens and the fine silks and exotic weaves reserved for wealthy customers reinforces class distinctions while generating enormous profits for the merchant houses that control these trade networks. Off-world trade relationships require guild houses to maintain complex diplomatic and commercial connections with trading partners across multiple star systems, their success dependent on navigating the bureaucratic requirements and political sensitivities that govern interstellar commerce. These relationships often involve multi-generational commitments that bind merchant houses to ongoing trade agreements regardless of changing market conditions or political circumstances. The House of Kryn's relationship with the Forge world Lucius dates back over 8 centuries. Their exclusive contracts for specialized mining equipment requiring continuous payments and political support even during periods when local demand for such equipment remains minimal. Rogue trader dynasties operating within Hive commercial networks bring exotic goods and technologies from the furthest reaches of imperial space, their ancient warrants of trade granting them privileges and authorities that supersede normal commercial regulations. These legendary merchant explorers rarely conduct business directly with local guild houses, instead operating through networks of intermediaries and factor agents who handle routine transactions while protecting their principals from the mundane complications of Hive politics. The factor house of Quintanus represents the interests of 3 separate rogue trader dynasties within Hive Cities, their ornate offices decorated with artifacts and curiosities gathered from worlds whose names appear on no imperial charts. The intermediary networks that facilitate rogue trader commerce include specialized brokers who possess the knowledge and connections necessary to navigate the complex legal and practical requirements of interstellar trade. These factor agents maintain detailed knowledge of imperial trade regulations, Xeno's artifact identification procedures, and the political relationships that determine which goods can be legally imported to specific worlds. The broker house of Malphi employs over 300 specialists whose expertise covers everything from alien technology assessment to the theological implications of importing materials that may have been exposed to warp influence during extended voyages. Exotic goods imported by rogue trader operations include technologies and materials that exist nowhere else within the Imperium, their rarity and unique properties commanding prices that exceed the gross domestic product of entire Hive sectors. Crystallized warp essence used in the construction of psychic amplification devices arrives in quantities measured in grams rather than tons, each shipment requiring extensive testing and purification procedures to ensure that the material has not been corrupted by prolonged exposure to chaos influences. The sale of such materials involves elaborate auction procedures conducted in secure facilities with psychic shielding and other protective measures designed to prevent accidents during the handling of potentially dangerous substances. Xeno's artifacts represent perhaps the most controversial category of goods handled through rogue trader networks, their alien origins requiring special dispensations from inquisitorial authorities before they can be legally traded within imperial space. These artifacts include everything from decorative items with no apparent function to sophisticated technologies whose operating principles remain incomprehensible to imperial science. The authentication procedures for Xeno's artifacts involve teams of specialists who examine each item for signs of chaos corruption, active technological functions, or other characteristics that might pose threats to human users. The black markets that operate in the shadows of legitimate commerce create parallel economic networks that handle goods and services prohibited by imperial law or guildhouse monopolies. These underground markets flourish in the forgotten spaces between official Hive levels, their trading posts hidden within abandoned industrial facilities, unused maintenance tunnels, and the ruins of earlier construction that lies buried beneath current structures. The sump market beneath Hive Primus operates in a vast cavern created by ancient mining operations, its maze-like layout providing multiple escape routes while offering protection from law enforcement raids. Illegal stim distribution represents one of the most profitable sectors of black market commerce, with synthetic drugs and combat enhancers commanding high prices from customers ranging from exhausted factory workers to wealthy nobles seeking exotic recreational experiences. The production facilities for these substances often occupy abandoned chemical plants or unused laboratory spaces, their operators employing chemists who possess sufficient knowledge to create effective formulations, while lacking the resources or legal authorization to operate legitimate pharmaceutical businesses. The quality control standards applied to black market stims vary dramatically between different producers, with some maintaining laboratory-grade facilities, while others operate crude mixing operations that produce substances of questionable purity and unknown side effects. Obscura represents the most widely distributed illegal stim within Hive Cities, its euphoric effects providing temporary escape from the harsh realities of Hive life while creating psychological dependencies that ensure steady customer demand. The production of Obscura requires relatively simple chemical processes and readily available precursor materials, making it accessible to small-scale producers who lack the sophisticated equipment needed for more complex drug manufacturing. Distribution networks for Obscura typically involve multiple layers of intermediaries who protect higher-level dealers from direct contact with street-level customers, creating organizational structures that can survive the arrest of individual members without complete disruption. Combat stims designed to enhance physical performance and pain tolerance attract customers from PDF forces, hive gangs, and industrial workers whose jobs involve dangerous physical activities. These substances often incorporate military-grade compounds that boost strength and reaction speed while suppressing fear responses and pain sensation. The side effects of combat stims include addiction, organ damage, and psychological changes that can persist long after the immediate effects have worn off. The illegal nature of these substances means that users have no recourse when contaminated or incorrectly formulated drugs cause permanent injury or death. Slot represents the most dangerous category of illegal stims, its powerful effects capable of transforming ordinary humans into frenzied killers who feel no pain and possess enhanced physical capabilities. The production of slot requires sophisticated chemical knowledge and access to controlled precursor materials, limiting its manufacture to well-funded criminal organizations with connections to legitimate pharmaceutical or chemical industries. The distribution of slot often involves criminal gangs who use the drug to enhance their own combat effectiveness, while selling surplus quantities to generate revenue for other illegal activities. Forged identification documents create opportunities for individuals to escape their assigned social positions or gain access to restricted areas and privileges normally reserved for higher status citizens. The production of convincing forgeries requires access to official document templates, specialized printing equipment, and detailed knowledge of the security features incorporated into legitimate identification papers. Master forgers operating within black market networks often maintain cover identities as legitimate clerks or administrative workers, their positions providing access to the materials and information necessary for creating authentic-looking documents. Identity theft schemes involve the systematic acquisition of personal information that allows criminals to assume the identities of legitimate citizens, often targeting individuals whose deaths or disappearances have not been officially recorded. These operations require sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities and the ability to maintain false identities over extended periods without detection by authorities. The victims of identity theft often include workers who have died in industrial accidents, individuals who have been reported missing in the Underhive, or people whose records have been lost due to administrative errors or deliberate manipulation. Travel permits represent one of the most commonly forged document types, as the restrictions on movement between Hive levels create strong demand for papers that allow unauthorized access to restricted areas. The complexity of legitimate travel permit systems, with their multiple authorization requirements and security features, creates opportunities for forgers who can produce convincing replicas that will pass casual inspection by security personnel. The The prices charged for forged travel permits vary according to the level of access they provide and the quality of the forgery work involved. Contraband Xenos artifacts filtered through black market networks include items that have been rejected by legitimate dealers due to their potentially dangerous properties or questionable legal status. These artifacts often lack proper authentication documentation or have been stolen from authorized collections, making their sale through official channels impossible. The buyers of contraband Xenos artifacts include private collectors who value rarity over legality, researchers conducting unauthorized studies of alien technology, and criminals who believe that Xenos devices might provide advantages in their illegal activities. The authentication of contraband Xenos artifacts relies on the expertise of black market specialists who lack the formal training and equipment available to legitimate dealers, but possess practical experience gained through years of handling alien materials. These underground experts develop informal networks for sharing information about artifact identification and potential hazards, their knowledge passed down through apprenticeship relationships rather than formal educational institutions. The accuracy of black market authentication varies significantly, with some specialists providing reliable assessments, while others offer little more than educated guesses about artifact origins and properties. Currency exchange systems within Hive Cities accommodate multiple forms of monetary instruments, from official imperial currency to local scrip and informal credit networks that facilitate trade at different social and economic levels. Imperial throne geld represents the highest denomination of official currency. Its sophisticated anti-counterfeiting features and universal acceptance making it the preferred medium for large transactions and interstellar trade. The exchange rates between throne geld and local currencies fluctuate according to economic conditions and political stability, with periods of uncertainty driving demand for the security offered by imperial currency. Local scrip issued by Hive authorities or major employers provides a medium of exchange for routine transactions within closed economic systems, though its value depends entirely on the continued stability and solvency of the issuing organization. Factory scrip distributed to workers as partial payment for their labor can only be redeemed at company stores or approved merchants, creating captive markets that benefit employers while limiting worker economic freedom. The exchange rates between different types of local scrip reflect the relative economic strength and political influence of their issuing organizations. Barter systems operating in the Underhive and other areas where official currency remains scarce rely on the direct exchange of goods and services without monetary intermediation. These systems often involve complex chains of exchanges where individuals trade items they possess for goods they need, with multiple transactions required to complete desired exchanges. The efficiency of barter systems depends on the existence of commonly accepted trade goods that serve as informal currency, such as ammunition, food rations, or basic tools that retain value across different communities. Credit networks operating within specific communities or professional groups provide mechanisms for conducting transactions without immediate payment, their effectiveness dependent on social relationships and reputation systems that ensure eventual settlement of obligations. These informal banking systems often center around respected community members who maintain records of credits and debits while facilitating transactions between individuals who may not know each other personally. The enforcement of credit obligations relies primarily on social pressure and the threat of exclusion from future transactions rather than legal mechanisms. Underground banking services provide financial services to individuals and organizations who cannot access legitimate banking institutions due to their illegal activities or lack of proper documentation. These services include currency exchange, money laundering, and the transfer of funds between different locations or organizations without creating official records that might attract law enforcement attention. The operators of underground banks often maintain multiple identities and employ sophisticated security measures to protect their operations from detection and infiltration by authorities. Money laundering operations disguise the origins of illegally obtained funds by passing them through complex networks of legitimate and illegitimate businesses until their criminal sources become untraceable. These operations often involve the use of front companies that appear to conduct legitimate business while actually serving as vehicles for processing illegal money. The sophistication of money laundering schemes varies from simple cash businesses that inflate their reported revenues to complex international networks that move funds through multiple jurisdictions and financial institutions. The enforcement of commercial regulations within Hive Cities requires constant vigilance from multiple agencies whose jurisdictions often overlap and conflict with each other. Guildhouse security forces protect their monopolistic privileges through private armies that can rival PDF units in their equipment and training, while Arbeit's investigators focus on violations of imperial trade law that threaten broader economic stability. The complexity of commercial law creates numerous opportunities for disputes between different enforcement agencies, particularly when cases involve both local violations and imperial crimes. Corruption within commercial enforcement creates opportunities for black market operators to continue their activities through bribery and political influence rather than operational security alone. The low salaries paid to many enforcement personnel create incentives for accepting payments from criminal organizations, while the complex nature of commercial regulations makes it difficult for supervisors to distinguish between legitimate enforcement discretion and corrupt favoritism. The investigation of enforcement corruption requires specialized techniques and often involves cooperation between multiple agencies with different priorities and legal authorities. The descent beyond the lowest levels of official Hive authority reveals a parallel civilization that exists in the forgotten spaces beneath the foundations of imperial order, where the remnants of failed construction projects and abandoned industrial complexes create a labyrinthine underworld populated by those who have fallen through the cracks of Hive society. These depths stretch for kilometers below the official Underhive boundaries, their twisted passages carved from the geological substrata of the planet itself and reinforced with salvaged materials from countless demolished structures. The air in these regions carries the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere that has passed through dozens of filtration systems, while the constant drip of contaminated water from corroded pipes creates pools of toxic sludge that glow with bioluminescent bacteria. The architecture of the deep Underhive consists primarily of improvised structures built within the skeletal remains of ancient construction projects that were abandoned when funding ran out or engineering problems proved insurmountable. Massive concrete pylons intended to support Hive levels that were never completed now serve as the foundations for ramshackle communities that have grown organically around these structural bones. Scavenged metal sheeting, plasteel panels, and rockcrete blocks create walls and roofs that provide minimal protection from the harsh environmental conditions, while jury-rigged electrical systems tap into power conduits that were forgotten by the engineers who installed them centuries ago. The territorial divisions within the Underhive reflect the constant struggle for control over the limited resources that enable survival in these hostile depths. Gang territories are marked by crude graffiti tags sprayed onto walls with luminescent paint that glows in the perpetual twilight of the lower levels, their symbols serving as warnings to potential intruders while identifying safe passage routes for allied groups. The Goliath Gang controls a network of abandoned mining tunnels that extend for several kilometers beneath Hive Primus, their muscular fighters using the confined spaces to their advantage when defending against incursions by rival gangs seeking to expand their own territorial holdings. Water sources represent the most valuable territorial assets within the Underhive, as access to clean drinking water determines whether communities can survive or must relocate to more favorable locations. The Escher gangs have established control over several natural springs that emerge from deep rock formations, their fighters using their knowledge of the tunnel systems to launch surprise attacks against any groups that attempt to establish competing claims to these vital resources. The water from these springs requires careful filtration to remove heavy metals and radioactive particles that have leached from the surrounding rock, but it remains far superior to the contaminated runoff that flows from the hive levels above. Food production in the underhive relies on a combination of scavenging, hunting, and primitive agriculture that takes advantage of the organic waste that filters down from the inhabited levels above. Mushroom farms cultivated in abandoned storage chambers produce edible fungi that can grow in the perpetual darkness, their cultivation requiring careful management of temperature and humidity levels to prevent contamination by toxic molds. The Kador gangs maintain several such agricultural operations, their religious devotion extending to the blessing of crops and the performance of purification rituals that they believe protect their food supplies from spiritual corruption. The hunting of tunnel rats and other vermin provides protein sources for underhive communities, though the creatures that inhabit these depths often carry diseases and parasites that pose significant health risks to human consumers. Giant rats the size of small dogs roam the deepest tunnels in packs, their mutations caused by exposure to industrial chemicals and radioactive waste creating specimens with enhanced aggression and resistance to conventional weapons. Experienced hunters use crossbows and improvised spears to take down these creatures while avoiding their venomous bites, though successful hunts require careful planning and coordination between multiple hunters to prevent the rats from overwhelming individual fighters. The plague zombies that shamble through certain sections of the underhive represent the horrific consequences of disease outbreaks that have claimed entire communities. They're reanimated corpses driven by viral infections that prevent normal decomposition while maintaining basic motor functions. These creatures typically emerge from areas where toxic waste has created breeding grounds for exotic pathogens, their presence marking territories that even the most desperate scavengers avoid due to the risk of infection. The Van Sar gangs maintain detailed maps of plague zombie territories, their technological expertise allowing them to develop protective equipment and detection methods that enable limited exploration of these dangerous areas. Chaos spawn represent the most terrifying threats that lurk in the deepest recesses of the underhive, their twisted forms created by exposure to warp energies that leak through dimensional barriers weakened by the massive psychic emanations of the hive's population. These abominations possess no consistent physical form, their flesh constantly shifting and mutating as the chaotic energies that animate them reshape their bodies according to incomprehensible patterns. Encounters with chaos spawn typically result in the complete destruction of anyone unfortunate enough to encounter them, though some survivors report that certain spawn appear to be drawn to specific locations or objects for reasons that remain unknown. Genestealer infestations within the underhive create perhaps the most insidious long-term threats to both the underground communities and the hive population above, as these alien predators establish breeding colonies that can remain hidden for generations while slowly expanding their influence. The initial signs of genestealer presence include the disappearance of individuals who venture too far into unexplored tunnel systems, followed by the gradual appearance of hybrid creatures that retain human intelligence while possessing alien physical characteristics. The Dalak gangs have developed specialized techniques for detecting genestealer activity, their information networks allowing them to track the subtle behavioral changes that indicate cult influence within specific communities. The hybrid generations produced by genestealer infestations infiltrate human communities with increasing effectiveness as their alien characteristics become less pronounced in successive generations. First-generation hybrids possess obvious alien features that make them unsuitable for infiltration, but third- and fourth-generation specimens can pass for normal humans while retaining psychic connections to the genestealer patriarch that commands their hive. These infiltrators work to expand the cult's influence by recruiting new members and gathering intelligence about potential threats to the infestation. Scavenging operations form the economic foundation of underhive society, with teams of specialists venturing into dangerous areas to recover valuable materials that can be traded for food, water, and basic necessities. The most valuable salvage includes functioning electronic components, intact weapons, and rare metals that can be sold to traders who maintain connections with the legitimate economy of the hive above. Successful scavenging requires detailed knowledge of the Underhive's geography, the ability to recognize valuable items among vast quantities of worthless debris, and the combat skills necessary to defend discoveries from rival scavengers and hostile creatures. Archaeotech recovery represents the most lucrative form of scavenging, as ancient devices and components from the dark age of technology can command enormous prices from collectors and tech priests willing to pay premium rates for functioning examples of lost knowledge. These artifacts typically require specialized knowledge to identify and extract safely, as many archaeotech devices incorporate dangerous technologies that can kill or mutate anyone who handles them incorrectly. The Orlok gangs maintain teams of tech specialists who combine engineering knowledge with practical scavenging experience, their expertise allowing them to recover valuable archaeotech while avoiding the hazards that have claimed countless other treasure hunters. Weapon caches hidden throughout the Underhive provide sources of military equipment that far exceed the crude firearms and improvised weapons typically available to gang fighters. These stockpiles often date back to previous conflicts or represent supplies that were lost during transportation between legitimate military facilities. The discovery of a weapon cache can shift the balance of power between rival gangs, as access to military-grade equipment provides significant advantages in territorial disputes and resource conflicts. Recycling operations convert waste materials from the hive above into usable resources that support Underhive communities, though these processes often involve exposure to toxic substances and dangerous working conditions. Metal recycling facilities use improvised furnaces and chemical baths to extract valuable materials from discarded equipment and structural debris, while textile recycling operations salvage fabric and synthetic materials that can be repurposed into clothing and shelter materials. The workers in these facilities often suffer from respiratory problems and chemical burns caused by exposure to the hazardous materials they process. Chemical processing operations in the Underhive produce everything from basic cleaning supplies to illegal stims and explosives, their crude facilities lacking the safety equipment and quality control measures found in legitimate industrial operations. These operations often occupy abandoned chemical plants or improvised laboratories built within natural cave systems, their isolation providing protection from law enforcement while creating risks of accidental explosions or toxic releases. The products of Underhive chemical operations vary widely in quality and purity, with some achieving standards comparable to legitimate manufacturers, while others produce substances that are barely functional or actively dangerous to users. The technological infrastructure that supports Underhive communities relies heavily on improvised solutions and jury-rigged equipment that combines salvaged components in ways their original designers never intended. Power generation systems cobble together vehicle batteries, industrial capacitors, and small generators to create electrical networks that provide lighting and basic equipment operation. These power systems operate at the edge of their capabilities and frequently fail due to overloading or component degradation, requiring constant maintenance by technically skilled individuals who understand both electrical principles and the specific quirks of improvised equipment. Communication networks within the Underhive utilize a combination of hardwired connections, radio transmissions, and primitive signal systems that allow coordination between different communities and gang territories. Hardwired networks run through abandoned communication conduits and jury-rigged cable installations that connect important locations while avoiding areas controlled by hostile gangs. Radio communications operate on frequencies that are either abandoned by legitimate users or deliberately jammed to prevent eavesdropping by law enforcement agencies. Water purification systems represent critical infrastructure that determines the health and survival prospects of Underhive communities, as access to clean drinking water remains one of the most pressing challenges in these contaminated environments. Improvised filtration systems combine salvaged filter media, chemical treatments, and primitive distillation equipment to remove toxins and pathogens from available water sources. The effectiveness of these purification methods varies significantly, with some communities achieving water quality that approaches legitimate standards, while others must accept contamination levels that cause long-term health problems. Waste disposal in the underhive creates ongoing environmental and health challenges, as communities lack access to the sophisticated waste processing systems that serve the hive levels above. Organic waste typically undergoes composting or incineration in improvised facilities that may not achieve sufficient temperatures to destroy all pathogens, while toxic waste accumulates in designated dump sites that gradually contaminate surrounding areas. The management of human waste requires careful attention to prevent the spread of disease, though many underhive communities lack the resources to implement effective sanitation systems. Medical care in the underhive relies on individuals with varying levels of training and access to pharmaceutical supplies, as legitimate medical facilities remain inaccessible to most underhive residents. Street doctors with questionable credentials provide basic treatment for injuries and common illnesses, their knowledge often gained through practical experience rather than formal education. The medications available in the underhive include expired pharmaceuticals scavenged from medical waste, black market drugs of uncertain quality, and traditional remedies prepared from local plants and fungi. Surgical procedures performed in underhive medical facilities often take place under primitive conditions with inadequate sterilization and anesthesia, resulting in high rates of infection and complications. The equipment used for these procedures typically consists of improvised surgical instruments and salvaged medical devices that may not function properly or may have been damaged during recovery from waste sites. Despite these limitations, skilled underhive medics can achieve remarkable results when treating trauma injuries and performing emergency procedures that save lives under desperate circumstances. The social structures that govern underhive communities reflect the harsh realities of survival in an environment where traditional law enforcement holds no authority and resources remain perpetually scarce. Leadership typically emerges through demonstrations of strength, cunning, or specialized knowledge that proves valuable to community survival. Gang leaders maintain their positions through a combination of personal combat ability, strategic thinking, and the loyalty of followers who benefit from successful leadership decisions. Justice systems within underhive communities operate according to informal codes that emphasize immediate resolution of disputes and practical consequences for antisocial behavior. Theft of essential resources typically results in physical punishment or expulsion from the community, while violent crimes may be answered with retaliatory violence or formal duels that settle disputes through combat. The lack of formal legal procedures means that justice often depends on the personal relationships and political alliances that influence community decision-making. Trade relationships between different underhive communities require careful negotiation and ongoing maintenance, as the lack of central authority means that agreements depend entirely on mutual benefit and the threat of retaliation for violations. These trade networks facilitate the exchange of specialized goods and services that individual communities cannot produce independently, from weapons and ammunition to food and medical supplies. The neutral territories where trading takes place often develop into permanent market settlements that serve multiple communities while maintaining independence from any single gang or faction. The corruption that festers within hive cities spreads like a cancer through the desperate masses, taking root in the hearts and minds of those who have lost hope in the Emperor's protection. In the overcrowded hab-blocks where families struggle to survive on meager rations, where workers toil endlessly in toxic manufactorums for wages that barely sustain life, the whispered promises of chaos cults find fertile ground among souls pushed beyond their breaking point. The initial recruitment often begins with simple acts of kindness, a cult member offering food to a starving family, providing medicine to a sick child, or extending friendship to someone isolated by the brutal realities of hive existence. These early contacts appear entirely innocent, as cult recruiters understand that direct approaches involving obvious heretical activities would trigger immediate rejection from potential converts. Instead, they focus on building trust and dependency through sustained assistance during times of crisis. When a worker loses his position due to injury or poor performance, cult members might offer temporary employment in their legitimate business operations. When a family faces eviction from their hab unit, cultists provide alternative accommodation or financial assistance that prevents immediate homelessness. These interventions create emotional bonds and feelings of obligation that make subsequent recruitment efforts far more effective. The gradual indoctrination process employed by chaos cults involves the slow introduction of theological concepts that initially appear to complement rather than contradict orthodox imperial doctrine. Cultists might speak of the emperor's hidden teachings that reveal deeper truths about humanity's destiny, or they might introduce meditation practices that supposedly enhance one's connection to the divine will. The corruption typically begins with subtle modifications to familiar prayers and rituals, adding phrases or gestures that carry hidden meanings while maintaining the surface appearance of proper imperial worship. Small group meetings provide the primary venue for advancing the indoctrination process, as cultists organize gatherings that ostensibly serve legitimate purposes while gradually introducing heretical elements. These meetings might begin as prayer circles for families facing particular hardships, study groups examining approved religious texts, or mutual aid societies providing support during economic difficulties. The intimate nature of these gatherings allows cult leaders to assess individual participants and identify those most susceptible to further corruption, while maintaining operational security through careful screening of attendees. The psychological manipulation techniques employed during these meetings exploit the specific vulnerabilities and frustrations that drive individuals toward heretical beliefs. Workers who feel powerless in their daily lives receive teachings about hidden sources of strength that can be unlocked through proper devotion to the true powers of the galaxy. Parents worried about their children's futures learn about prophecies that promise salvation for those who demonstrate sufficient faith in the coming transformation. The elderly who face declining health and approaching death discover doctrines that offer immortality through service to eternal masters who transcend mortal limitations. As indoctrination progresses, cultists introduce increasingly explicit heretical concepts while maintaining the psychological pressure and social bonds that prevent members from questioning or abandoning the group. The revelation of chaos worship occurs gradually, with each step justified through theological arguments that build upon previously accepted ideas. Members who express doubts or resistance face social isolation within the group, loss of the material benefits provided by cult membership, and subtle threats against their families or livelihood that discourage defection. The organizational structure of established chaos cults within Hive Cities typically follows cell-based patterns that limit the damage caused by the discovery and elimination of individual members. Each cell operates independently while maintaining limited contact with higher levels of the cult hierarchy, ensuring that the capture and interrogation of low-level cultists cannot compromise the entire organization. Cell leaders receive their instructions through coded messages, dead drops, or brief meetings with intermediaries who possess no knowledge of the cult's overall structure or objectives. Recruitment for chaos cults often targets specific demographic groups whose circumstances make them particularly vulnerable to corruption. Industrial workers exposed to toxic chemicals and dangerous working conditions prove susceptible to Nurgle cults that promise relief from suffering and the embrace of decay as a natural part of existence. Young people frustrated by limited opportunities and rigid social hierarchies gravitate towards Slaanesh cults that offer experiences of pleasure and sensation unavailable through legitimate channels. Military personnel and security forces attracted to violence and domination find appeal in corn cults that celebrate combat and bloodshed as sacred acts. The rituals performed by chaos cults begin with seemingly harmless activities that gradually escalate in their heretical content and dangerous consequences. Early ceremonies might involve group meditation sessions, communal meals with special significance, or the creation of artwork and symbols that appear decorative but carry hidden meanings. As members become more deeply committed to the cult, the rituals incorporate increasingly explicit violations of imperial law and religious doctrine, including the desecration of imperial symbols, the invocation of demon names, and ultimately the performance of human sacrifice. Genestealer cult infiltration follows distinctly different patterns from chaos corruption, beginning with the infection of key individuals who occupy positions of authority or influence within Hive society. The initial genestealer infiltrators target administrative officials, industrial supervisors, and community leaders, whose positions provide access to large numbers of potential victims, while offering protection from casual scrutiny. A single infected administrator can facilitate the placement of hybrid offspring in critical positions throughout the bureaucratic hierarchy, creating networks of influence that extend far beyond the original point of infection. The biological nature of genestealer corruption creates multi-generational infiltration patterns that can remain undetected for decades, as hybrid offspring gradually assume increasingly important roles within Hive society. First-generation hybrids possess obvious alien characteristics that limit their utility for infiltration, but their superior physical capabilities make them valuable as enforcers and protectors for the growing cult. Second-generation hybrids retain some alien features, but can often pass for normal humans with minor mutations or deformities, allowing them to occupy positions that require public interaction while maintaining their loyalty to the genestealer patriarch. Third- and fourth-generation hybrids appear almost entirely human while retaining the psychic connection to the patriarch that ensures absolute loyalty to the cult's objectives. These nearly pure-strain humans can achieve positions of significant authority within legitimate institutions, from senior administrative roles to command positions within PDF forces. Their human appearance combined with their alien-enhanced intelligence and dedication makes them extremely effective at advancing the cult's interests while remaining completely above suspicion from normal security screening procedures. The family networks that form the foundation of genestealer cult organization create social structures that appear entirely normal while serving the alien agenda of preparing for the eventual arrival of the Tyrannid Hive fleets. Infected families maintain the appearance of normal human relationships while secretly coordinating their activities to support cult objectives. Children born into these families receive indoctrination from birth that presents their alien heritage as a blessing rather than a corruption, creating psychological conditioning that makes defection virtually impossible. Professional associations and workplace relationships provide additional vectors for genestealer cult expansion, as infected individuals use their positions to recruit colleagues and subordinates into the growing network. A single infected supervisor in a manufactorum can gradually replace key personnel with hybrid offspring or newly infected workers, creating entire departments that serve cult interests while maintaining the appearance of normal industrial operations. The slow pace of this infiltration process makes it extremely difficult to detect until the cult reaches sufficient size and influence to begin more overt activities. The Inquisition maintains extensive networks of agents and informants throughout Hive Cities, specifically to detect and counter the various forms of corruption that threaten imperial society. These operatives include both professional inquisitorial personnel and ordinary citizens who have been recruited to provide intelligence about suspicious activities within their communities. Acolytes trained in the recognition of heretical symbols and behaviors conduct regular surveillance of areas known to be vulnerable to cult infiltration, while interrogators with specialized skills in detecting deception interview suspects and witnesses to uncover hidden connections to heretical organizations. The identification of chaos cult activity often begins with reports from informants who observe unusual behavior patterns, the appearance of unfamiliar symbols, or gatherings that occur outside normal social or religious contexts. These initial reports trigger comprehensive investigations that may involve weeks of surveillance, the placement of undercover agents within suspected groups, and the careful analysis of communication patterns and financial transactions that might reveal the cult's organizational structure. The Inquisition's investigators employ sophisticated techniques for gathering evidence while avoiding premature action that might allow cult leaders to escape or destroy critical information. Genestealer cult detection requires different investigative approaches that focus on biological rather than ideological indicators of corruption. Inquisitorial agents trained in xenobiology conduct medical examinations of suspected cult members, looking for genetic markers and physiological anomalies that indicate alien infection. The analysis of family genealogies and breeding patterns can reveal the multi-generational infiltration characteristic of genestealer cults, while psychological evaluation techniques identify the distinctive behavioral patterns associated with psychic domination by alien patriarchs. The purification rituals employed by the Inquisition during anti-cult operations serve both practical and symbolic functions, ensuring the complete elimination of heretical influence while demonstrating imperial authority to surviving populations. These procedures typically begin with the systematic arrest and interrogation of all suspected cult members, followed by the thorough search and cleansing of areas that have been contaminated by heretical activities. Buildings that have hosted cult rituals undergo complete purification through fire, blessed oils, and prayers that remove any lingering spiritual corruption. The interrogation techniques used during cult investigations combine technological methods with psychological pressure designed to break down the mental conditioning that protects cult secrets. Truth serums and neural probes can extract information from uncooperative subjects, while sensory deprivation and other psychological techniques weaken the mental barriers that prevent confession. The most dangerous cult leaders may require extreme measures, including psychic interrogation, by sanctioned psychers who can directly examine their thoughts and memories for evidence of corruption. Mass executions represent the ultimate purification ritual employed when cult infiltration has reached levels that threaten the stability of entire hive sectors. These operations typically involve the public execution of all confirmed cult members, followed by the burning of their bodies and the demolition of buildings that have been contaminated by heretical activities. The psychological impact of these purges serves as a deterrent to potential cult recruits, while demonstrating the consequences of heretical deviation to the surviving population. The signs of corruption that alert authorities to hidden threats vary according to the type of heretical influence involved, requiring trained observers who understand the specific indicators associated with different forms of corruption. Chaos cult activity often manifests through the appearance of 8-pointed stars, demon sigils, or other symbols carved into walls or painted in locations where they can be seen by potential recruits. The discovery of ritual implements including black candles, ceremonial daggers, or books containing heretical texts provides concrete evidence of cult activity that justifies immediate investigation. Behavioral changes among suspected cult members include increased secrecy about personal activities, unexplained absences from work or family obligations, and the adoption of new speech patterns or mannerisms that may reflect cult indoctrination. Physical symptoms of chaos corruption can include unexplained mutations, changes in eye color or skin texture, and the development of unusual marks or scarring that appear to form recognizable patterns. The presence of these symptoms requires immediate medical examination by personnel trained in identifying the various forms of corruption that affect human physiology. Genestealer cult infiltration produces different warning signs that focus on genetic and behavioral anomalies rather than ideological corruption. Medical examinations may reveal unusual bone density, modified organ structures, or genetic markers that indicate alien hybridization. Behavioral indicators include enhanced physical coordination, unusual group loyalty patterns, and communication methods that suggest psychic coordination between individuals. The discovery of these symptoms triggers immediate quarantine procedures and comprehensive testing of potentially infected individuals and their associates. Environmental indicators of cult activity include the discovery of hidden ritual sites, the presence of unusual organic growths or formations, and atmospheric anomalies that suggest warp influence or alien contamination. Chaos ritual sites often feature elaborate altar arrangements, pools of blood or other bodily fluids, and architectural modifications that create specific geometric patterns believed to enhance warp contact. Genestealer cult sites typically include breeding chambers, biomechanical growths, and structural modifications that accommodate alien physiology and reproductive requirements. The investigation of suspected corruption sites requires specialized equipment and protective measures designed to prevent contamination of investigating personnel. Psychic dampeners and blessed amulets provide protection against warp influence during the examination of chaos cult sites, while biohazard suits and genetic scanners protect investigators from alien contamination during genestealer cult operations. The documentation of evidence at these sites follows strict protocols that ensure the preservation of critical information while preventing the spread of corruption to other locations. The acquisition of basic necessities within Hive Cities transforms simple biological requirements into complex challenges that consume enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources from populations already stretched to their breaking points. Water distribution systems operating throughout the middle and lower levels deliver recycled liquid that has passed through dozens of filtration stages, each processing cycle removing some contaminants while introducing others from corroded pipes and overwhelmed purification equipment. The taste of this recycled water carries metallic undertones from iron deposits and chemical additives used in the purification process, while its cloudy appearance reflects the presence of suspended particles that the filtration systems cannot completely eliminate. Citizens queue for hours at water distribution points located throughout residential sectors, their plastic containers and improvised vessels marking their places in lines that stretch for blocks during peak demand periods. The rationing systems that govern water allocation base individual allowances on work productivity records and family size, with essential workers receiving supplemental rations, while those with poor performance evaluations find their allocations reduced below subsistence levels. Families develop elaborate conservation strategies that involve reusing wash water for cleaning purposes, collecting condensation from atmospheric processors, and carefully timing their consumption to maximize the utility of limited supplies. The water recycling facilities that serve hive populations operate massive processing plants located in the middle levels, their filtration systems combining mechanical screening, chemical treatment, and biological processing to transform wastewater into potable liquid. These facilities process everything from industrial runoff to human waste, their multi-stage treatment systems designed to remove toxins and pathogens while recovering as much usable water as possible from contaminated sources. The bacterial cultures used in biological treatment stages require careful maintenance to prevent the growth of harmful organisms that could contaminate the entire water supply. Quality control procedures for water distribution involve regular testing of samples taken from throughout the distribution network, though the standards applied often prioritize quantity over purity due to the enormous demand from hive populations. Testing equipment measures bacterial content, chemical contamination levels, and the presence of heavy metals that could cause long-term health problems, but the acceptable limits for these contaminants remain significantly higher than those applied in more privileged areas of the hive. Workers responsible for water quality monitoring face constant pressure to approve marginal supplies rather than reduce availability during shortage periods. Emergency water reserves maintained by hive authorities provide backup supplies during system failures or contamination events, though these stockpiles remain insufficient to meet full population needs for extended periods. Storage facilities located in secure areas contain treated water in massive tanks that require constant circulation and chemical treatment to prevent bacterial growth and contamination. Access to emergency reserves requires authorization from senior administrators, and distribution during crisis periods follows strict priority systems that favor essential workers and critical infrastructure operations over general population needs. Food distribution within Hive cities relies on processed rations manufactured in automated facilities that convert raw organic materials into standardized nutritional products designed for maximum shelf life and efficient distribution. These ration bars contain synthetic proteins derived from algae cultivation, carbohydrates extracted from fungal biomass, and vitamin supplements that prevent deficiency diseases among populations with limited dietary variety. The texture of standard rations resembles compressed cardboard, while their flavor combines artificial additives that attempt to mask the underlying taste of processed organic matter. Protein synthesis facilities located in the industrial sectors operate massive bioreactors that cultivate single-celled organisms capable of rapid reproduction in controlled environments. These organisms feed on organic waste collected from throughout the hive, their growth cycles carefully managed to maximize protein production while preventing contamination by harmful bacteria or viruses. The harvesting process involves mechanical separation of cellular material, followed by chemical processing that removes cellular walls and concentrates the protein content into forms suitable for food production. Hydroponic gardens maintained in specialized agricultural levels produce limited quantities of fresh vegetables and fruits that supplement the basic nutrition provided by processed rations. These facilities operate under carefully controlled environmental conditions that optimize plant growth while minimizing water and energy consumption. Their automated systems monitoring temperature, humidity, and nutrient levels throughout the growing cycle. The vegetables produced in these gardens typically lack the flavor and nutritional density of naturally grown produce, but they provide essential vitamins and dietary variety that help prevent malnutrition among hive populations. Fungal cultivation represents one of the most efficient methods for producing edible biomass within the confined spaces available in hive cities, as mushrooms and other fungi can grow in darkness while converting organic waste into nutritious food. Cultivation chambers located throughout the lower levels maintain optimal conditions for fungal growth, their climate control systems regulating temperature and humidity while preventing contamination by competing organisms. The mushrooms produced through these operations provide protein and essential nutrients, though their earthy taste and spongy texture make them unpopular among consumers who have access to alternatives. Food preservation techniques employed in hive cities focus on extending shelf life through chemical treatment, dehydration, and sealed packaging that prevent spoilage during extended storage periods. Preservation facilities use radiation treatment to sterilize food products and eliminate bacteria that could cause spoilage, while chemical preservatives prevent oxidation and maintain nutritional content over time. The packaging systems employed for food distribution utilize synthetic materials that provide barrier protection against moisture and contamination, while remaining cost-effective for mass production. Black market food trading provides access to higher quality nutrition for those who can afford premium prices or who possess valuable trade goods to exchange for superior rations. These underground markets often feature fresh produce smuggled from agricultural worlds, protein sources derived from hunting underhive creatures, and luxury items that have been diverted from shipments intended for the upper levels. The quality and safety of black market food varies dramatically, with some vendors maintaining high standards while others sell products that pose significant health risks to consumers. Air quality within hive cities represents a constant health hazard that affects every aspect of daily life, as atmospheric processors struggle to maintain breathable conditions for billions of inhabitants while filtering out the pollutants generated by massive industrial operations. The recycled atmosphere carries the acrid smell of chemical processing, the metallic taste of particulate matter, and the organic odors of biological waste processing that create a distinctive environmental signature recognizable to anyone who has lived within hive walls. Respiratory problems affect significant portions of the population, with chronic coughing, lung irritation, and reduced breathing capacity becoming accepted as normal conditions of hive existence. Atmospheric processing facilities operate enormous filtration systems that draw contaminated air from throughout the hive structure, passing it through multiple treatment stages designed to remove toxins and replenish oxygen levels. These systems employ mechanical filters that capture particulate matter, chemical scrubbers that neutralize acidic compounds, and biological processors that use bacterial cultures to break down organic pollutants. The maintenance requirements for these facilities involve constant replacement of filter media and regular cleaning of processing equipment that becomes clogged with accumulated contaminants. Industrial emissions from manufactorums and processing plants contribute the majority of atmospheric pollution within hive cities, their smokestacks and exhaust systems releasing chemical vapors, particulate matter, and toxic gases directly into the enclosed atmospheric system. Pollution control measures focus on dilution and dispersion rather than elimination, as the economic costs of comprehensive emission control would significantly impact industrial productivity. Workers in heavily polluted areas receive breathing apparatus and protective equipment, though the effectiveness of this gear diminishes over time due to filter saturation and equipment deterioration. Ventilation systems that circulate air throughout residential and commercial areas operate according to complex routing patterns that attempt to provide fresh air to all inhabited spaces while managing the pressure differentials created by the hive's massive atmospheric processors. These systems include primary circulation ducts that carry air between major sections, secondary distribution networks that serve individual levels, and local ventilation equipment that provides air movement within specific buildings and work areas. The maintenance of ventilation systems requires specialized technical knowledge and access to replacement parts that may be difficult to obtain during supply shortages. Air quality monitoring equipment installed throughout hive cities measures concentrations of various pollutants and provides data that authorities use to adjust atmospheric processing operations and issue health warnings during periods of particularly severe contamination. These monitoring stations track levels of toxic gases, particulate matter, and biological contaminants that could pose immediate health threats to exposed populations. The data collected by monitoring systems often reveals contamination levels that exceed safe exposure limits, but the practical impossibility of eliminating all pollution sources means that authorities must balance health concerns against economic and operational requirements. Personal protective equipment available to hive residents includes basic respirators and filter masks that provide limited protection against atmospheric pollutants, though the cost and availability of effective protective gear remains beyond the reach of many families. Industrial workers receive specialized breathing apparatus appropriate for their specific work environments, while residents of heavily polluted areas may invest in personal air purification, devices that filter contaminated atmosphere within their living spaces. The effectiveness of personal protection depends on regular maintenance and filter replacement that adds ongoing costs to household budgets already strained by basic survival needs. Healthcare systems serving hive populations operate through networks of Medicaid stations and treatment facilities that provide basic medical services while prioritizing cases based on the patient's economic value and likelihood of recovery. These facilities focus on maintaining workforce productivity rather than comprehensive healthcare, with treatment decisions guided by utilitarian calculations that maximize the benefit to overall hive operations. Medical personnel working in these systems receive training that emphasizes rapid diagnosis and efficient treatment of common conditions, while referring complex cases to higher-level facilities that may be inaccessible to ordinary citizens. Medicaid stations located throughout residential areas provide primary health care services including injury treatment, basic surgery, and the management of chronic conditions that affect worker productivity. These facilities operate with limited equipment and pharmaceutical supplies, their capabilities restricted to handling routine medical problems that can be resolved through standardized treatment protocols. The medical staff at these stations typically includes trained technicians rather than fully qualified physicians, their knowledge sufficient for common procedures but inadequate for complex medical situations. Pharmaceutical supplies available at Medicae stations consist primarily of generic medications produced in Hive manufacturing facilities, their quality and effectiveness varying according to production standards and quality control procedures. Pain relievers, antibiotics, and basic surgical supplies form the core inventory at most facilities, while specialized medications for rare conditions or advanced treatments remain available only at higher-level medical centers. The distribution of pharmaceuticals follows rationing systems that allocate medications based on medical priority and patient work status, with essential workers receiving preferential access to limited supplies. Surgical procedures performed at Medicae stations range from basic wound treatment and bone setting to more complex operations that require general anesthesia and sterile operating conditions. The surgical equipment available at these facilities includes basic instruments and monitoring devices sufficient for routine procedures, though the lack of advanced diagnostic equipment limits the complexity of operations that can be safely performed. Surgical outcomes depend heavily on the skill and experience of individual medical personnel, as the standardized training provided to Medicae technicians may not prepare them for unusual complications or difficult cases. Mental health services within Hive medical systems receive minimal resources and attention, as psychological problems are generally viewed as personal weaknesses rather than legitimate medical conditions requiring treatment. The constant stress of Hive life creates widespread mental health problems, including depression, anxiety, and various forms of psychological breakdown, but the available treatment options remain limited to basic counseling and pharmaceutical intervention. Mental health professionals working in Hive systems often lack adequate training and resources to address the complex psychological challenges created by overcrowding, pollution, and economic hardship. Rejuvenat treatments available to wealthy citizens provide life extension and physical enhancement that can add decades to natural lifespans while maintaining youthful appearance and physical capabilities. These expensive procedures require sophisticated medical facilities and rare pharmaceutical compounds that remain accessible only to the upper levels of Hive society. The Rejuvenat process involves cellular regeneration therapy, organ replacement, and genetic modification that reverses aging effects while enhancing physical and mental performance beyond normal human limits. Advanced medical facilities serving the wealthy incorporate technologies and treatment methods that represent the pinnacle of imperial medical science, their capabilities extending far beyond the basic healthcare available to ordinary citizens. These facilities employ fully qualified physicians with extensive training and experience, while their equipment includes advanced diagnostic systems, surgical robots, and pharmaceutical synthesis equipment that can produce customized medications for individual patients. The contrast between elite medical care and basic Medicae services reflects the broader social stratification that characterizes Hive society. Medical research conducted in Hive cities focuses primarily on industrial health problems and the development of treatments for conditions caused by environmental pollution and occupational hazards. Research facilities study the effects of chemical exposure, radiation poisoning, and other health problems that affect large numbers of workers. Their findings used to develop protective measures and treatment protocols that maintain workforce productivity. The ethical standards applied to medical research vary according to the social status of research subjects, with experiments on lower-class populations receiving less oversight than studies involving wealthy volunteers. Educational systems within Hive cities operate through networks of indoctrination centers and training facilities that combine basic literacy instruction with intensive ideological programming designed to create loyal and productive citizens. These institutions serve dual functions as educational facilities and propaganda centers, their curricula carefully designed to instill proper imperial values while providing the practical skills necessary for assigned work roles. Students attend classes according to schedules coordinated with family work assignments, their education structured around the economic and social requirements of Hive society rather than individual interests or aptitudes. Basic literacy programs teach reading and writing skills sufficient for following work instructions, completing administrative forms, and understanding official announcements and propaganda materials. The reading materials used in these programs consist primarily of approved imperial texts, including religious works, technical manuals, and historical accounts that reinforce orthodox beliefs about humanity's role in the galaxy. Writing instruction focuses on practical applications, including the completion of work reports, the submission of official requests, and the composition of loyalty oaths and religious devotions. Mathematical education provides computational skills necessary for industrial work and basic commerce, with instruction focused on practical applications rather than theoretical understanding. Students learn arithmetic operations, basic geometry, and simple statistical concepts that enable them to perform calculations required in manufacturing and administrative work. Advanced mathematical concepts remain restricted to specialized training programs for technical workers, as higher-level mathematical knowledge is considered unnecessary for most occupational roles. Technical training programs prepare students for specific industrial roles through hands-on instruction using equipment and procedures identical to those employed in actual work environments. These programs include training in machinery operation, quality control procedures, and safety protocols that reduce workplace accidents and improve productivity. The selection of students for technical training depends on aptitude testing and family background, with children from successful worker families receiving priority for advanced training opportunities. Religious instruction forms the foundation of all educational programs, with students required to memorize extensive portions of imperial doctrine and participate in daily prayer and worship activities. This instruction emphasizes absolute obedience to imperial authority, the sacred nature of productive labor, and the moral obligation to sacrifice personal interests for the greater good of humanity. Religious education includes the study of imperial history, the lives of saints and martyrs, and the theological principles that justify imperial rule and social hierarchy. Ideological programming integrated throughout educational curricula reinforces loyalty to the emperor and acceptance of social conditions through constant repetition of approved beliefs and values. Students learn to identify and report signs of heretical thinking, to accept hardship as necessary for human survival, and to view their assigned social roles as divine mandates that cannot be questioned or changed. The psychological conditioning employed in these programs creates deep emotional attachments to imperial symbols and authority figures, while generating fear and revulsion toward alternative belief systems. Physical conditioning programs prepare students for the demanding physical requirements of industrial work, while instilling discipline and obedience through military-style training exercises. These programs include strength training, endurance exercises, and coordination drills that develop the physical capabilities necessary for manual labor. The military aspects of physical training teach students to follow orders without question, to work effectively in groups, and to accept authority without resistance. Vocational placement systems assign students to specific career paths based on aptitude testing, family background, and economic requirements rather than personal preferences or interests. These assignments typically occur during early adolescence and determine the individual's entire future within Hive society, as opportunities for career change remain extremely limited once initial placements are made. The placement process involves comprehensive evaluation of student capabilities and psychological profiles to ensure optimal matching between individual abilities and available work roles. Advanced education opportunities remain available only to students who demonstrate exceptional abilities, and whose families possess sufficient political influence to secure access to higher-level training programs. These programs prepare students for administrative, technical, or military leadership roles that require advanced knowledge and decision-making capabilities. The selection process for advanced education involves rigorous testing and background investigations that verify both intellectual capability and ideological reliability. Entertainment options available to Hive populations provide brief respites from the grinding routine of daily survival, while serving additional functions as social control mechanisms and propaganda platforms. These activities range from simple diversions that occupy leisure time to elaborate spectacles that reinforce imperial values and social hierarchies. The availability and quality of entertainment vary dramatically according to social status and economic resources, with wealthy citizens enjoying sophisticated cultural events while ordinary workers make do with basic recreational activities. Gladiatorial contests held in arenas throughout the middle levels provide violent spectacles that satisfy popular demand for excitement while demonstrating the consequences of criminal behavior and social deviance. These contests feature condemned criminals, captured under Hive gangers, and volunteer fighters competing in combat scenarios that typically result in death or serious injury for the participants. The arena events serve multiple social functions, including the disposal of unwanted populations, the reinforcement of social order through public punishment, and the provision of cathartic entertainment that channels popular frustrations into acceptable outlets. Combat sports popular among working populations include boxing matches, weapon dueling, and team fighting competitions that provide opportunities for spectators to engage in gambling and social interaction. These events typically occur in improvised venues within residential areas, their informal organization allowing for flexibility in scheduling and rules, while avoiding the bureaucratic requirements associated with official entertainment venues. The participants in these competitions often include off-duty workers seeking additional income or social recognition, though the risk of injury creates ongoing tension between entertainment value and practical concerns about workforce health. Theatrical performances staged in community centers and converted industrial spaces present approved historical dramas, religious allegories, and propaganda pieces that combine entertainment with ideological instruction. These productions typically feature amateur performers drawn from local communities, their scripts carefully reviewed by authorities to ensure compliance with imperial doctrine and social values. The themes explored in these performances emphasize loyalty, sacrifice, and the triumph of imperial forces over various enemies, while their emotional content provides audiences with vicarious experiences of heroism and adventure. Musical entertainment includes both live performances and recorded music distributed through public address systems and personal listening devices. The approved musical repertoire consists primarily of imperial hymns, patriotic songs, and folk music that reinforces cultural identity and social cohesion. Musical instruments available to ordinary citizens include simple percussion devices and basic stringed instruments that can be manufactured locally, while more sophisticated instruments remain accessible only to professional musicians and wealthy patrons. Religious festivals provide the most elaborate entertainment events available to general populations, their celebrations combining spiritual observance with community gathering and recreational activities. These festivals feature processions, communal meals, musical performances, and dramatic presentations that create shared experiences of joy and spiritual renewal. The organization of religious festivals requires months of preparation by community volunteers and religious authorities, their success depending on careful coordination of resources and activities that serve both entertainment and devotional purposes. Gambling activities popular among Hive populations include card games, dice competitions, and betting on various contests and events that provide opportunities for social interaction and the possibility of financial gain. These activities often occur in informal settings including taverns, worker break areas, and private gatherings where participants can engage in friendly competition while discussing work and community issues. The authorities generally tolerate small-scale gambling as a harmless diversion, though large-scale operations that threaten social order or economic stability face intervention by law enforcement agencies. Recreational reading materials available to literate citizens include approved fiction, historical accounts, and technical publications that provide entertainment while reinforcing proper imperial values. These materials typically feature stories of imperial heroes, accounts of military victories, and instructional content that promotes productivity and social responsibility. The distribution of reading materials occurs through community libraries and reading rooms that provide access to approved publications, while monitoring usage patterns to identify potential security concerns. The catastrophic collapse of Hive Sector Gamma 7 on Necromunda began with a hairline fracture in a primary support column that had endured millennia of stress from the massive weight bearing down from the levels above. The initial crack, no wider than a human finger, propagated through the adamantium-reinforced rockcrete with devastating speed as the structural integrity of the entire section failed in a cascading chain reaction. Within minutes, 43 levels of residential hab-blocks, manufactorums, and commercial districts pancaked downward in a thunderous avalanche of debris that claimed over 2 million lives and left another million trapped beneath tons of twisted metal and pulverized rockcrete. The structural engineering principles that govern Hive construction incorporate multiple redundancy systems designed to prevent total collapse, but the age of many Hive cities means that critical support elements operate far beyond their original design specifications. The adamantium framework that forms the skeleton of each Hive level experiences constant stress from thermal expansion, seismic activity, and the gradual settling of foundations that can create microfractures in supposedly indestructible materials. Regular inspection protocols exist to identify potential structural weaknesses, but the sheer scale of Hive cities makes comprehensive monitoring impossible with available resources and personnel. Toxic gas leaks represent another persistent threat that can transform entire Hive sectors into death zones within hours of initial contamination. The chemical processing facilities that operate throughout industrial levels handle enormous quantities of corrosive acids, poisonous solvents, and volatile compounds, whose accidental release creates atmospheric contamination that spreads rapidly through ventilation systems. The Great Poison Cloud incident on Armageddus Prime resulted from a catastrophic failure in a promethium refinery that released chlorine gas throughout 17 levels, forcing the emergency evacuation of over 50 million residents while claiming hundreds of thousands of lives among those who could not reach safety in time. Industrial accidents involving plasma reactors and fusion generators create radiation hazards that can contaminate vast areas for decades, rendering entire Hive sectors uninhabitable until extensive decontamination efforts can reduce exposure levels to acceptable limits. The meltdown at reactor complex Theta 9 on Mordian forced the permanent abandonment of 37 levels after radioactive materials breached containment and spread throughout the atmospheric circulation system. Emergency response teams equipped with radiation suits and detection equipment worked for months to establish safe corridors through contaminated areas, but large sections of the affected zone remain sealed behind blast doors and warning barriers that will persist for generations. Atmospheric processor failures can suffocate entire populations when backup systems prove inadequate to maintain breathable conditions throughout massive Hive structures. The primary atmospheric plant serving Hive Tertius on Valhalla suffered a complete systems failure during a routine maintenance cycle, leaving 12 billion residents dependent on emergency oxygen reserves that could sustain life for only 18 hours. The frantic repair efforts involved thousands of tech adepts working around the clock to restore functionality, while emergency evacuation procedures attempted to relocate critical personnel to unaffected areas of the Hive. Fire represents perhaps the most terrifying disaster that can befall Hive populations, as the confined spaces and limited escape routes create conditions where relatively small blazes can escalate into infernos that consume entire levels. The Great Fire of Hive Primus began in a textile manufactorum when overheated machinery ignited stored synthetic fabrics, but inadequate fire suppression systems and blocked emergency exits allowed the flames to spread through ventilation ducts and elevator shafts to 17 different levels. The fire burned for 6 days before emergency crews could establish effective fire breaks, leaving behind charred ruins that housed the remains of over 800,000 victims. Seismic activity affecting hive cities can trigger structural failures that propagate throughout interconnected levels, creating earthquake damage that extends far beyond the initial impact zone. The tectonic instability of many hive worlds results from extensive mining operations that have weakened planetary crusts, while the enormous weight of hive structures creates additional stress concentrations that can trigger seismic events. The Mordian earthquake of the year 987 of the 41st millennium measured 8.2 on the imperial seismic scale and caused widespread damage throughout 3 separate hive cities, with casualty estimates exceeding 15 million dead and another 40 million left homeless when their residential blocks suffered irreparable structural damage. Emergency protocols activated during major disasters follow standardized procedures designed to preserve essential infrastructure and personnel while managing the evacuation of affected populations. These protocols include the immediate sealing of contaminated areas through automated blast door systems, the activation of emergency communication networks that bypass damaged infrastructure, and the deployment of rescue teams equipped with specialized equipment for operating in hazardous environments. The implementation of emergency procedures requires coordination between multiple agencies and authorities whose normal jurisdictional boundaries may become irrelevant during crisis situations. Lockdown procedures implemented during toxic contamination events involve the systematic isolation of affected areas through the closure of ventilation systems, transportation networks, and access routes that could allow the spread of dangerous materials. These procedures often trap thousands of residents within contaminated zones while protecting larger populations from exposure, creating tragic situations where authorities must choose between accepting certain casualties in affected areas or risking much larger losses through contamination spread. The lockdown protocols include provisions for emergency life support systems and rescue operations, but the effectiveness of these measures depends on the nature and severity of the contamination involved. Evacuation routes planned for different types of emergencies utilize transportation networks and emergency passages that remain functional during various disaster scenarios. These routes include primary evacuation corridors designed for rapid movement of large populations, secondary pathways that provide alternatives when main routes become blocked, and emergency tunnels that connect critical facilities and provide escape routes for essential personnel. The capacity limitations of evacuation systems mean that full population evacuation remains impossible during most emergency situations, requiring authorities to prioritize the rescue of specific groups based on their importance to hive operations and recovery efforts. Mass transportation systems activated during evacuations include cargo elevators converted for passenger use, emergency transit vehicles deployed from strategic reserves, and commandeered civilian transport that authorities requisition for evacuation purposes. These systems operate under emergency protocols that override normal scheduling and safety procedures to maximize evacuation capacity, though the stress placed on transportation infrastructure during crisis situations often results in additional failures that complicate rescue efforts. The coordination of evacuation transportation requires real-time communication between multiple control centers and the flexibility to adapt routing as conditions change throughout the affected areas. Emergency shelter facilities established during major disasters provide temporary accommodation for displaced populations, while permanent housing solutions are developed or affected areas undergo repair and decontamination. These shelters typically utilize large open spaces including sports facilities, warehouses, and converted industrial buildings that can accommodate thousands of refugees with basic sleeping arrangements and sanitation facilities. The management of emergency shelters requires enormous resources for food distribution, medical care, and security services that prevent overcrowding from leading to additional humanitarian crises. Medical triage systems implemented during mass casualty events prioritize treatment based on the severity of injuries and the likelihood of successful recovery, with medical personnel making difficult decisions about resource allocation under extreme pressure. Emergency medical facilities established near disaster sites include field hospitals equipped with basic surgical capabilities and trauma treatment equipment, while more seriously injured victims require evacuation to higher-level medical centers that may be located in unaffected areas of the hive. The psychological trauma associated with major disasters creates additional medical challenges that strain mental health services already inadequate for normal population needs. Astra Militarum deployment during Hive City emergencies typically involves regiments stationed on nearby worlds or orbital facilities, their arrival often delayed by the time required for interstellar travel and the bureaucratic processes necessary to authorize military intervention in civilian areas. The 47th Vestroyan Firstborn Regiment, deployed to assist with disaster relief on Necromunda, arrived 6 days after the initial structural collapse, their heavy equipment and engineering capabilities proving invaluable for clearing debris and establishing emergency infrastructure. However, their late arrival meant that most rescue opportunities had already passed, leaving the regiment to focus on recovery operations and the prevention of secondary disasters. Imperial Guard engineering units possess specialized equipment and training for disaster response operations, including heavy lifting equipment, excavation machinery, and portable power generation systems that can restore basic services to affected areas. These units often include tech adepts and other specialists capable of repairing damaged infrastructure and assessing structural integrity in compromised buildings. The deployment of engineering resources requires careful coordination with local authorities to ensure that military assistance supports rather than interferes with ongoing civilian rescue efforts. Space Marine intervention in Hive City disasters represents the ultimate emergency response capability, though the rarity and strategic value of Astartes' forces means that such deployments occur only during the most catastrophic situations or when other threats compound natural disasters. The Ultramarines' 4th Company responded to the Demon incursion that followed the atmospheric processor failure on Mukraga's honor, their rapid deployment and superior combat capabilities proving essential for containing the warp breach that threatened to consume the entire hive. However, even Space Marine intervention could not prevent the loss of over 3 million civilians who perished before the breach could be sealed. The tactical capabilities of Space Marine forces include specialized equipment for operating in hazardous environments, advanced communication systems that remain functional during infrastructure failures, and the combat experience necessary for dealing with the secondary threats that often emerge during major disasters. Astartes' forces can establish secure perimeters around disaster sites, conduct search and rescue operations in areas too dangerous for ordinary personnel, and provide the military leadership necessary for coordinating complex emergency responses involving multiple agencies and organizations. Orbital bombardment represents the most extreme emergency response option available to Imperial authorities, employed only when disasters threaten to spread beyond containment or when heretical influences exploit emergency conditions to establish footholds within hive populations. The Exterminatus protocols applied to Hive Secundus on Necromunda followed the discovery that genestealer cults had used the chaos of a major industrial accident to seize control of several hive levels and begin preparations for a full-scale uprising. The orbital strikes that followed eliminated the immediate threat, but also destroyed any possibility of rescue for millions of trapped civilians. Long-term consequences of major Hive City disasters extend far beyond the immediate casualties and property damage, creating social and economic disruptions that can persist for generations. The refugee populations created by major disasters often overwhelm the capacity of receiving areas, leading to overcrowding, resource shortages, and social tensions that can trigger additional conflicts. The survivors of Hive Sector Gamma-7's collapse spent years in temporary shelters before alternative housing could be constructed, their displacement creating ongoing social problems and economic hardship that affected entire planetary regions. Economic disruption caused by Hive City destruction ripples throughout entire sectors as supply chains collapse and industrial capacity disappears overnight. The loss of Manufactorum Complex Alpha 12 during the Great Fire of Hive Primus eliminated 40% of the planet's lasgun production capacity, forcing military procurement officers to source weapons from alternative suppliers at significantly higher costs while accepting reduced quality standards. The economic impact of such losses affects not only local populations, but also the broader imperial war effort that depends on consistent industrial output from major hive worlds. Reconstruction efforts following major disasters require enormous investments of resources and labor that strain planetary economies already struggling with the costs of maintaining existing infrastructure. The rebuilding of collapsed hive sections involves not only the physical reconstruction of damaged areas, but also the replacement of lost industrial capacity, the reestablishment of transportation networks, and the creation of improved safety systems designed to prevent similar disasters in the future. These reconstruction projects often take decades to complete and may never fully restore the lost capacity and population levels that existed before the disaster. Insurance systems within the imperial economy provide limited compensation for disaster losses, though the scale of major Hive City catastrophes often exceeds the capacity of insurance providers to honor their obligations. The complex legal frameworks governing disaster compensation create lengthy bureaucratic processes that may take years to resolve, while the actual payments received by disaster victims typically cover only a fraction of their actual losses. The inadequacy of insurance coverage means that most disaster recovery depends on government assistance and charitable organizations rather than private compensation systems. Psychological trauma affecting disaster survivors creates long-term mental health challenges that overwhelm already inadequate medical services while reducing the productivity and social stability of affected populations. The survivors of major disasters often experience post-traumatic stress, depression, and anxiety disorders that persist for years after the initial event, their psychological problems compounded by ongoing economic hardship and social displacement. The lack of adequate mental health services means that many trauma victims never receive proper treatment, leading to increased rates of substance abuse, domestic violence, and suicide among disaster-affected populations. Social reorganization following major disasters often results in permanent changes to community structures and social hierarchies, as traditional authority figures are killed or displaced, and new leadership emerges to fill the resulting vacuum. The breakdown of normal social controls during emergency situations can lead to the emergence of criminal organizations, religious movements, and political factions that exploit the chaos to establish alternative power structures. These social changes may persist long after physical reconstruction is complete, creating lasting alterations to the political and cultural landscape of affected areas. Abandonment represents the ultimate consequence for hive sections that suffer damage so severe that reconstruction proves economically unfeasible or technically impossible. The lower levels of Hive Tertius on Valhalla remain sealed and abandoned following radioactive contamination that would require centuries to dissipate naturally, their former populations permanently relocated to other areas, while the contaminated zones serve as grim reminders of the disasters that can befall Hive cities. These abandoned areas often become refuges for criminal organizations and heretical cults that exploit the lack of official oversight to establish hidden strongholds. The lessons learned from major disasters drive improvements in emergency preparedness and structural design that may prevent similar catastrophes in future construction projects. The revised building codes implemented following the Great Fire of Hive Primus include improved fire suppression systems, wider emergency corridors, and better compartmentalization that limits the spread of fires and other hazards. However, the enormous cost of retrofitting existing structures means that most safety improvements apply only to new construction, leaving billions of residents in older hive sections vulnerable to the same types of disasters that have claimed countless lives throughout imperial history. As the 41st millennium draws toward its close, the hive cities of the Imperium stand as monuments to both human achievement and human suffering, their towering spires reaching toward distant stars, while their foundations rest upon the bones of countless generations who lived and died within their walls. These vertical worlds continue to house the billions of souls who toil endlessly in service to the Emperor, their lives shaped by the harsh realities of existence within structures that represent humanity's greatest architectural achievements and its most desperate attempts at survival. The disasters that periodically devastate these cities serve as reminders of the fragility of human civilization in a galaxy filled with dangers that threaten to extinguish the light of humanity forever. Yet still the hive cities endure, rebuilt and repopulated by those who have nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose but their faith in the Emperor's protection.